preliminary council meeting for Tuesday the 2nd of March for the Shire Council, held here at Mortlake Chambers. First of all, I'd like to do acknowledgement of country, so we acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting and pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. Recording of council meetings. Please note that today's meeting is being video recorded. This recording will be uploaded to Council's website and will be accessible by the general public. By participating in and addressing those present at the meeting, you consent to any information you disclose, including any personal information or sensitive information, being recorded and uploaded to the website. You may stand for the prayer. Almighty God, we humbly beseech your blessing on the Council, direct and prosperous deliberations for the welfare of the people of the Moines Shire. Amen. We have no apologies?
No apologies, Mayor.
Thank you. Do we have anyone wishing to declare a conflict of interest for any item on today's agenda?
Yes, Mayor. I'd like to declare a conflict in item 7.
Thank you, that's noted. Item 7. Any others? Mr Davis.
Mr Mayor, with regards to the notices of motion for Ryan Corner, so I think that's item 11.
Yep. 11, 12, 13. Thank you.
Yeah,
Mr Davis.
12, 13.
Okay. Confirmation of minutes for the previous meeting. Any questions on that firstly? Okay, we'll seek a mover for that, please. Councillor Purcell's moved, second Councillor Foster. Any commentary?
No, I think they're a true record of the meeting, so I'm happy to move.
Thanks. All those in favour? Carried 7-0. Move on to public participation. So, those that are presenting today, we have 6 presenters and 1 to read out. Everyone has read the governance rules around public participation. I understand that it's a 5-minute presentation with questions after that. Okay, so we'll start off today with Ms Joy Howley to present. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and councillors. Many in the community are shocked that the Moines Shire's previous request to the Planning Minister for an EES for the vast Mount Fines wind farm was not granted. I'm putting on public record their request for the Moines Shire to please write again, asking that the Planning Minister, Honourable Richard Wynne, require an environmental effects statement for Woolnorth's Mount Fines wind farm planning application. I refer you to the Ministerial Guidelines for Assessment of Environmental Effects under the Environmental Effects Act 1978, page 7, and some of the referral criteria that's quoted there, from there. Individual types of potential effects on the environment that might be of regional or state significance and therefore warrant referral of a project. And a dot point, potential long-term loss of a significant proportion, e.g. 1 to 5%, depending on the conservation status of the species, of known remaining habitat or population of a threatened species in Victoria. A combination of the environmental effects of 2 or more of the following types of potential effects on the environment that might be of regional or state significance, and therefore warrant referral of a project are matters listed under the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act 1988, potential loss of a significant area of a listed ecology community, or a potential loss of genetically important population of an endangered threatened species listed or nominated for listing, including as a result of a loss of fragmentation of habitats, potential loss of critical habitat, or potential significant effects on habitat values of a wetland supporting migratory birds, and potential extensive or major effects on the beneficial uses of water bodies over the long term due to changes in water quality, stream flows or regional groundwater levels. Seems the Planning Minister is inviting mayhem if developers are allowed to decree their own rules and standards by him not asking for an EES for the Mount Alpines wind farm. I would like to now take the Brolgas as an example. The Planning Minister and Minister for Energy and Environment and Climate Change are being misled by developers and their own departments with regard to the Brolgas. There is increasing data on flocking, nesting, feeding and habitat requirements being held by dwell, farmers, wind developers and others. Yet the information is being withheld, hidden, manipulated and ignored, thus misleading the Planning Minister as to the vulnerable status of the Brolgas. The cumulative effect of wind farms continues to stress them and their habitat. It is compounded every time another wind development is added. Many are disturbed to such a degree they are not reproducing. Their failure to breed within 5 k's of wind turbines and the dislocation from their nesting areas due to turbine construction, flicker noise and other wind farm related activities will quickly lead to the decimation of the Brolga around Western Victoria. Birds and other fauna are already being harmed by disturbance, transmission line, towers, and the effect of increasing number of developments are having on their environment. In their study, researchers from Queen's University Belfast have found noise pollution is threatening the survival of more than 100 different species. The World Health Organization has said noise is one of the most hazardous forms of pollution. But their meta-study found it doesn't just cause ill effects on humans, but on the biology and physiology of all animal groups studied. Amphibians, arthropods, birds, fish, mammals, mollusks and reptiles, terrestrial and aquatic. The researchers suggest that noise pollution affecting animals is the norm, not the exception. We just don't know what the total effects will be for the moine environment, but we do have enough information to know that what is happening to birds around wind towers. The neighbouring Dundonnell wind farm seems to me an example of ignored advice and thus poor planning when it comes to the Brolga, peregrine falcon and others.
Sorry, Miss Elliott, you're at the 5 minutes, so I'll just give you 30 seconds to wrap up, please.
We support Shire attempts to bring due process into planning for windbreaks farms and ask that you write again, please, requesting the Planning Minister require an environmental effects statement for Mount Fine's application. Thank you.
Thanks very much for your presentation. We have questions from councillors. Councillor Dugas.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that. Have you done an estimate of how many Brolgas you think we'll lose over the next few years?
I understand, Councillor Dukas, that there are roughly 200 breeding pairs left. If that falls below 100 breeding pairs, the species is then deemed as unrecoverable. And I know in recent times we've lost at least 25 pairs of breeding Brolga. So there's not a lot of leeway left for the Brolga.
Okay.
Thanks, Miss Ellie. Yes,
Yeah.
follow up, Councillor
Karen,
Dugas.
sorry, Councillor Frost.
I'm fine, no.
Okay. I reckon a month or 6 weeks ago, the Shire put a submission into the government in relation to the setback for Brolgas. Did you ever read that submission that we put in?
No, I haven't. Sorry. No.
So is that submission on our website?
Mr Miller.
Through you, Mayor, I can check that, but I'm imagining it would be Councillor Dukas.
Right, so that's interesting reading.
Yeah.
The other question would be, Brolgas seem to be an issue at most of these wind farms. I haven't come, I say most because I haven't come across one yet where they haven't. Long term, I mean, there's some wind farms are now trying to gain a permit. They're going through the stages. You've talked about an EES. What would you like to see the Shire do, starting today at this meeting?
Well, the thing is that from the bit that I know, there's not much we can do as a community or at individuals, but the Shire does have a role in the planning process to ask for an EES. Is that my understanding?
As you've mentioned, we have already sent a letter, and you're asking us to resend another letter. Yeah.
Look, please.
Yep.
I just think that the minister, as I've said, the minister is being misled by what Dwell and the development companies are telling him, and I really wonder if he comprehends the vulnerability of the Brolga. And there's two communities of Brolgas, but they won't mix to breed. So everything keeps getting smaller and smaller all the time.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Thanks, Mrs. Howley. I'm just wondering, do you feel a letter is strong enough? You seem to get fobbed off with letters. Do you think we should be requesting a meeting with the minister, or I just feel a letter?
Oh well, I'd love you to have a meeting with the minister, but I wasn't game enough to ask for that. But I just, as I've said, I can only say it a million times. I don't think the minister understands the situation the Brolgas are in.
Councillor Purcell.
Thank you, and it's probably not from Ms Howley. Did we get a response from that request from the minister? Does anyone know?
We have.
And
Yes.
has that been made available to the public, whatever that response was?
I'd have to check that. Double check what it has.
We take that one on notice, I think, Mr Mayor.
Okay, because I think it would be good to have a copy of the response from
It would be
from
helpful.
the minister
Yes.
anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would be very helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mayor Mead. Thanks for your presentation, Joy, and I can appreciate your concerns. And my question is to Mr Davies, in terms of procedural matters of how to best follow up. We think a discussion at workshop about where to from here would be our best kind of, in terms of governance, about how to support in terms of advocating regarding these issues.
Through you, Mayor. Certainly a discussion with councillors at workshop. We've certainly got the message here to write to the minister as to whether or not there's other advocacy avenues we can follow. I think that's for a discussion with the councillors, where it can be more than a one-string attack in terms of trying to get the case reinterrogated.
I mean, sorry, Ms Mayor, but I mean, I'm asking for Mount Fines, but in reality, it is everywhere. I mean, you observe what's going on around, and it's quite scary. There's Brolgas that have disappeared. There was quite a large group of them, not far from home, and they've just disappeared. It's going to be a wind farm, you just keep wondering to yourself what the hell is going on, because it is a real problem.
All right, thanks, Ms Howley. Any further questions? Okay, thanks very much for your presentation.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thanks. Okay, I'll invite Mr Steve Myers, Ms Donna Monaghan to come and present at the table, thanks, regarding the planning application for 35 Cox Street, Port Fairy.
Thank you, Mayor, councillors. I'm speaking today on behalf of John Nicholson and Michelle Evans. They own land at 35 Cox Street. It's agenda item number 5, and they're looking to develop a dwelling on that site. Council will be relatively familiar with that proposal, given that we met on site last week. The application is for a 3-bedroom home, and it's got a single-storey component to the front and a double-storey component to the rear. We just wanted to have a chat around the objection that's been received to that application. The officer's report is very thorough in terms of describing the application, doing an assessment against the planning scheme. We won't reiterate any of that. There's been an objection received from a neighbour at 33 Cox Street, and generally that objection questions the scale of the development and non-compliance with the Port Fairy design guidelines, and also non-compliance with building requirements or building regulations, with particularly in relation to daylight to existing habitable windows and overlooking. We just note that the Port Fairy design guidelines have got performance standards. In this case, there's 9. On site, it was referenced that either 7 or 8 of those we didn't comply with, and we just wanted the opportunity today to restate that that's not true. We comply with all performance standards, but we do acknowledge in 3 instances, we do need to have a variation to what's called the acceptable measures in order to meet those performance standards. And I just wanted to take you through some of those today, particularly the ones that we discussed on site in a little more detail, particularly around height and setbacks. I believe it's been circulated. We've just circulated an attachment which effectively takes an assessment through those 9. I won't go through all those 9. The 2 that I wanted to touch on was the height and the setbacks. On the first page, we've got a diagram sort of showing the elevation of the proposed dwelling from the eastern side. So that's the elevation that would face the property at number 33, so the objector's property. A couple of things I just wanted to note there, and the design guidelines, even at first read, as a planner, you do need to read them a few times, I find, just to sort of understand in terms of how height's measured. In this case, the 35 Cox Street, so the site, slopes from the street. So at the street, it's higher than it is at the rear of the property. It's just important to note that in terms of the guidelines sort of anticipate that might be a situation on some lots and makes allowances for that. What it talks about is that the height of a dwelling should be measured at the front facade of the proposed house. So effectively, the height of the block at the front of the block, or the height of the house at the front of the block, you can then sort of just measure a plane, and the height in some cases at the back may exceed 7 metres. We've done a diagram here which illustrates that. So at the front of the property, you know, the dwelling does comply with that 7 metre height limit, being at 6.65 metres. And as we progress down the block, the height does increase above the 7 metres. We just wanted to highlight that the design guidelines make allowances for that, and that is an allowable height under the design guidelines. The other thing too I just wanted to note there was in relation to overlooking. A question's been raised by the objector in relation to overlooking, and if we just look at those first floor windows, you've got a series of windows, and if I just move from left to right, the first window there, you'll see 3 windows. That's a bedroom window. As I move along, you've got a toilet, a bathroom, and a stairwell. The toilet, bathroom, and stairwells aren't habitable rooms, and there's no need to sort of do any obscuring to those windows. The bedroom is obscured, so there's no overlooking from that window. We just wanted to highlight that overlooking's being dealt with in that regard. The other one I just want to touch on was setbacks, and I've just got a tab there which has got the setbacks tabbed, just a couple of pages in. What I've done there is just taken the plans that were submitted with the application, and in green, if you like, kind of highlighted what those setbacks are. We just, again, the performance standard talks around buildings in Port Fairy being viewed sort of within a landscape setting. So that there's kind of room, if you like, around buildings to breathe, that you don't end up with sort of continuous walls of development, so houses effectively adjoining one another. So as you go down a street, the rhythm of development, or what you typically see in Port Fairy, is houses, some space, another house and some space. We've just done this diagram and highlighted that in green to sort of illustrate how this application achieves that. So you'll see there in terms of number 33, we've got about 2.7 metres between the 2 houses, so again that space is reflected there. As I move to 37, which is on the...
You're at the 5-minute mark, Mr.
Thanks,
Myers,
yep,
so...
almost done, thanks.
Yep.
On number 37, we've just highlighted there that the carport structure, while it's built to the boundary, does have some transparency through it. I can see through it, so again, there's sort of room to breathe there as well. What I wanted to note there finally is in terms of with the front setback, and I've just drawn that in that red line, there's been a lot of effort go to sort of, if you like, get that front setback to match the properties to either side in terms of that stepping back. So as you look at the streetscape, this development's not in front of the other.
Thanks very much, Mr. Myers, for your presentation. We'll go to questions now from councillors. Do you have any questions from councillors for Mr. Myers or Ms. Monaghan, sorry.
Who's Miss Monahan?
No. 5 minutes together.
Oh, okay. All right.
Councillor Lockett?
Thank you, Mayor Mead. One of the questions we've had discussed earlier today was that there's not many two-storey properties in James Street. I'm wondering if you can comment about that and legislation that kind of frameworks that cover that.
Sure, thanks. I'm assuming you refer to Cox Street.
Yeah, sorry.
That's fine, that's all right. You're right, and I think that's where the design's taken some nods to that. There's a good illustration on, excuse me, I'll just flick through. Page number 2, sorry, where it just sort of just shows in terms of that built form, will be read as a single-storey built form to the street. And then the second story element to this house is set back a good 19 metres from the frontage. Councillor Lockett, that is an attempt to allow almost the street to be read as single story, but still allowing some double story elements within the streetscape.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Gleeson?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. On Friday, you reminded us that building requirements should not be assessed during the planning permit assessment in this case. Can you just explain that to me?
Yeah, sure. We look at in terms of how VCAT would deal with these sorts of matters. VCAT will tend to, if there's not a planning requirement to look at it, they'll defer it to the building process. I must admit it can be a bit frustrating because there'll be nothing worse than getting a planning permit for something that you can't then go and build. As planners and designers, what we look at is in making sure that we do have compliance with the building regulations, even though under planning we're not required to. And the two here that we've looked at are round overlooking and daylight to windows, overshadowing as well.
So,
Follow-up question?
oh, I've got a few. So does that mean that that the council shouldn't consider the objections that have been, or the concerns that have been put before us in relation to overshadowing and privacy issues?
Sure, good question. I would suggest that, yeah, you should consider those matters. In that, what we've done as part of the response to the objection to is sort of furnish additional information, which we weren't required to do as part of the planning application, just to demonstrate and kind of give some peace of mind, if you like, to all parties, that we don't have those overlooking, overshadowing and blocking natural light issues.
Another question?
Sorry.
Councillor Gleeson?
Donna, just in your planning, it's all very clever and, we've got all the concept plans and the largeness and all that sort of stuff. But from your front view, it doesn't show the first floor.
That's just because the house, that second story is so far back from the street. The 3D perspective, are they the shots that you're talking about?
Yes.
The street view perspective?
Oh, I've got them all somewhere. Yeah, whatever. From the front view of the proposed dwelling doesn't show the first floor.
Yes, that's because it is recessed. You can just see the very tip of the finial of that first floor gable in between the two front gables. Can you see a little speck there?
I can.
That is the top of the gable, which is demonstrated in the view beside that, which is view from the footpath in front of number 33. You'll see a bit more of the first floor element in that perspective. So it's just the actual outcome of standing on the nature strip looking straight ahead. It's the vanishing point just behind the front gable.
But quite clearly, Steve's presentation here shows us that it's quite clearly well above the...
Yes,
Yeah, okay, yeah.
and that is a technical document in elevation, so you'll never see that house look like that elevation. That's a technical document for demonstrating heights, etc. But the perspectives that we've added to this application are a true indication of what the building will look like in real life.
Another one, Stephen, please. Sorry. Yeah. In your report, you identified 6 items that do not conform with the acceptable design standard, and you've provided an alternative design response to achieve the performance standard. So, can you explain to me alternative design response?
Yeah, sure. So I'll just correct that. So there's 3 that require an alternative design response, 6 of them comply. When we look at alternative design responses, the portfolio design guidelines are sort of structured with a performance standard. So they make a statement. An example, I'm just looking at that building in bulk mass one, which says ensure new development does not compromise the characteristic scale of the pattern of the area. That's the performance standard we need to meet. It then has some acceptable solutions, and from time to time you'll find development can easily just accommodate those acceptable solutions. In this case, height's a good example, where the acceptable design solution for height is 7 metres maximum height. We're underneath that. In a way, as planner, I'd look at that and go, we've ticked that, we've met the performance standard because we've also met the acceptable design standard. Occasionally, and setbacks is a good example here, where when you read the acceptable design solution, and sometimes they've just been written for a different site context. And in this case, when we look at the setbacks, we've got a very narrow block. When we look at those setbacks, it wouldn't leave a lot of room to develop the block. It then invites, we need to come up with an acceptable design solution. So we go back to that performance standard and work out, well, what was it trying to achieve, and are we and can we achieve it in a different way?
All right, thanks, Mr. Miles. Councillor Purcell.
Yeah, just one. On your plan, your bulk mass plan on the second page, it'll depend on where that's taken. If it's sort of from the ground or from 8 feet high. So is there a perspective that that's taken from? And if I was standing out the front, what would it look like?
Perspective?
Yeah.
They're taken from average standing height. We survey the site. We put those levels in our program to create a contour, and then we set the camera at 1500 millimetres above the point that we're standing on to give a standing view. So those 3 streetscape perspectives are all as if you're walking along the footpath and just standing directly in front of the house.
Okay.
So I don't. You would need to be higher in the air to be able to see the second story behind.
Right. If this goes through council and gets built, I look forward to walking past and just seeing that.
Thanks, Councillor Purcell. Any other questions? Councillor Dugas?
Yeah, thank you. Following on from Councillor Gleeson on the pages aren't named, you said it's got here front view of proposed dwelling with the nice pretty fence, etc.
Yes, yep.
Now, the second story, you say we could hardly see it, is that correct?
It's just that you can see the finial just between the portico gable and the front
so
gable.
you're saying that's all we see?
Yes.
So if we go to the top of it and look at the north elevation,
Yes.
what can we see there? Can't we see it?
But we won't, the point I'm trying to stress is that we won't ever see the building in elevation. It is a technical drawing, and the 3D perspectives are put on the application to demonstrate what we will see in real life, not if you were to look at a house on the street now, you wouldn't see a flat elevation. You would see angle, you would have perspective to that. And buildings that are taller in the background will appear smaller and further back.
Right, but if you look at the bottom one, that little plinth you talk about is, what would you say, just slightly in on your left. But if you go to the top, it's gone past. So
absolutely, and again...
So you've got 2 different diagrams.
One is a perspective and one is an elevation. They're all of a modelled CAD build that is to the millimetre, but keeping in mind that the elevation is not what you will see in real life walking past the house. I don't know. Do you know how to elaborate that other?
It's a good question. Through you, me, Councillor.
I've got two different pictures here.
Yeah, we get that question raised quite often. When you look at an elevation, it can sometimes look worse than it would be once it was constructed. What the elevation shows is what the elevation would be is if you were standing directly in front of it and square onto it. In reality, you won't stand at that point. You'll see it from a perspective. Yeah.
Okay.
So these aren't
sorry.
to scale.
These are
Now,
true
Councillor Dugas, just 1 second.
images.
Mr. Davis had his hand up there to help respond to that question. Yep.
Through you, Mayor, it's safe to say one's plan view, one's actual view. So the actual view are the three to the bottom of that page. The plan view, which is almost like your flat view, is shown for the assessment purposes.
So these are computer...
Okay, follow-up question, Councillor
Yeah,
Dugas, you're not yet.
these are computer images.
The whole document is produced
In a computer.
3D model, which again is demonstrated in other images in that general axonometric view. So the technology of our program gives us the capacity to walk through the house, and it is all true to scale.
All right, we've got another question from Councillor Gleeson.
Just to clear my mind, so when we look at the neighbours on either side, how much higher than 33 will this building be?
So I have got. Are you talking about the front part of the home?
No, the highest point.
Oh, the highest point. Okay, I'll just refer to that elevation. I'll just get that.
Do you have any other questions? Yep, Councillor Dugas.
Yeah, thank you. The setbacks, the side setbacks are from the building to the boundary line?
Correct.
Right, so the side setback here between 35 and 33, look on this diagram, is how much?
That's 1.4. 1.4.
1.4 metres.
Yeah, that's that dimension there.
Right. So different.
Oh, just
You've
got
got more. Okay, and on the other side?
it's just a tad over 1 metre, so that's at 1.1005.
And you said that the garage was built on the boundary line?
The neighbouring garages or carport was built on the
On
boundary.
the neighbouring one?
Correct.
Okay, we have an answer for Councillor Gleeson's question.
Okay, so just looking at this eastern elevation, the hatched area here is the outline of the property at 33 Cox Street, and this ridge line is 3.6 higher than the top of the parapet of the neighbour's property, but in saying that, it is set off the fence line, so the distance that location is about 4.8 metres, the highest point of the roof. So this is the context, and this is the purpose of elevation too, so that we can technically demonstrate measurement.
Okay, thanks very much. We've had a good range of questions there, so we'll leave it there. Thanks for your presentation.
Okay, thank
Thanks
you.
very much. I will now invite Mr Chris Loram to present on the same matter, 35 Cox Street, Port Fairy planning application, which is agenda item 5 in today's meeting.
Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks, Mr Loram.
Councillors. I've responded in writing to the call-in report and officers' recommendation. I've also corresponded with councillors and officers about my concerns about the gaps in this assessment process, and all that information would be on the file which councillors would have access to. I intend to use my time before councillors today to address the proposition which seems to be central to the Planning Department's assessment and recommendation for this application. That is, that the Port Fairy design guidelines are, quote, suggestions which can be ignored or are ideals which has no practical purpose in assessing this planning application. For these are the terms used by the officers responsible for the assessment of this application in the call-in report and in the site visit and in the report attached to the recommendation. Firstly, I will need to address, however, some of the new information contained in the report attached to the agenda. And I refer you to the third paragraph on the final page under the heading, Information from VCAT. And I won't read the whole of that, but I'll just make sure we've got that because you would have all read it. It says, VCAT cannot consider overlooking concerns regarding Clause 54 standards or of daylight to existing windows. And ends, these matters must be considered under the relevant building regulations. Well, I went to that web page that's referred to and can confidently, absolutely inform Council that this information definitely does not come from VCAT at all. Right? Where does the information come from? We don't know, and I say it's wrong. I would be happy to explain my reasons to councillors should you have any questions. What it's about, the assessment is about applying the planning scheme, the whole planning scheme, in accordance with the Planning and Environment Act. Particularly, I refer to clauses 54 and 60, which deal with, I've left that in my bag, those clauses, but they deal with request for further information, which Council has a very broad power to request on anything that's relevant to the assessment. The fact that it's not triggered by Res Code doesn't prevent Council asking for that information because it's relevant to, in this case, my client's amenity, which is a relevant planning consideration. And it also relates to what Council has to consider when deciding a planning application. And that includes the planning scheme and it includes objections. There's nothing in the planning scheme to support this interpretation that's been put to you in this agenda. There's nothing in the legislation. There is no legal authority quoted to support it, and it's not on the VCAT webpage. The interpretation leads to the untenable position which the planning officer has taken that a neighbour's amenity can never be a relevant planning consideration to an application for a single dwelling on a lot of over 300 square metres. When, if you look at the planning scheme, the protection of residential amenity is one of the objects of the zone. So what's been put to you as something coming from VCAT, which it's not, is completely untenable. I will now turn to the most recent piece of information circulated to councillors, showing the shadow diagrams. And that I believe was circulated last Friday, after I think this agenda was prepared. These plans only provide an assessment in relation to clause 54.045 of the planning scheme, that is the overshadowing objective of Res Code Standard A14. They are not a complete Res Code assessment, and in particular they do not provide an assessment in relation to clause 54.043, which is the daylight to existing windows objective in Standard A12, which is of particular concern to my client and which he explained to councillors in front of his kitchen window at the site visit. I also bring your attention, still on that extra document that you've been given, I also bring your attention to the boundary section diagram on page 2, which is seriously inaccurate in respect to the respective building heights. The diagrams have been provided to council shows bedroom 1 of the proposed dwelling to be the same height as the client's residence.
Mr. Long, you're at the 5-minute mark, so I'll ask you to summarise in 30 seconds, please.
Okay. Well, in fact, they're different heights, completely different heights. The height of the ceiling is 3.8 metres of the proposed dwelling. The height of my client's house is 3.2 metres. It's shown on the diagram as the same level. I think all these plans need to be seriously audited for accuracy. Let's move away from Res Code and councils, and the lack of assessment of the impact of my client's home, because there are other serious deficiencies in this application.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Loram. We'll have to leave it there. We'll go to questions now.
Yeah.
Questions for Mr. Loram from councillors? Yes, Councillor Gleeson.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I asked Steve about clarifying for me. You've identified what you consider 7 breaches to our planning in relation to this application.
Yes.
And I identified 7 with Steve. He said 6. So he's given an explanation of alternatives. Why does that doesn't satisfy you?
The question is, where do these guidelines stand in terms of council's assessment of an application, right? And it's not a black and white issue, it's a grey issue. It's a matter that is subject to interpretation, but we can say this, that it will depend on the context, what the words that are used, and the nature of the application itself, right? In terms of the words that are used, you couldn't have more clearer, more prescriptive words than say the combined setback shall be 6 metres, and they're actually 2.3, right? Or it's hard to imagine a major breach unless the building had been built to the walls, right? That issue, I believe, from a barrister I've been speaking to, is being considered by the full bench of the Supreme Court today as we're deliberating. That is, how are statutory guidelines to be applied? And it's up to council to think what is a common sense way for you to read, having regard to the site, having regard to the character of the neighbourhood, and also I would suggest having regard to the neighbour's amenity, right? Because it's an objective of this zone to protect residential amenity. The neighbour is clearly the most significant resident on the block, right? The failure to properly consider the Port Fairy design guidelines would result in council issuing an invalid permit. Important to bear that in mind, right? So what does properly consider? It doesn't mean ignoring. It doesn't mean, oh yeah, well we forget about that, or they're just ideal things, which is what you've all been told by the planning department, right? It means properly consider. Now, it's not my job to say what they should have done and what they could have done, but I can say that there is certainly a lot of room for compromise in this plan, and my client's never been given that opportunity to meet with or discuss the plans.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Loram. That answers the question. We have other questions? Other questions from councillors? Yes, Councillor Lucas.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr. Loram, you said 5 minutes ago, you talked about height levels, where on the plans they've shown that they're both the same, but they're different. What was that? What wall was that, or was it at the eve height?
It's the design. I don't have that in front of me actually, but it was circulated to councillors on Friday. It's a small part of those plans on the second page, which shows the respective heights of my neighbour's dwelling and the ceiling of the bedroom window, the height of the bed. It's labelled bedroom, right? On the plan, right? The height of the ceiling height of the bedroom on the plans that we've been provided is 3.8 metres. The total height of my client's house is 3.2 metres. They are shown as the same height on that plan.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions?
Question.
One more, yep, Councillor Dukes, another one.
To our Director of Planning, can that be justified in any way, the 2 different heights? Showing a picture where they're level, but there's 2 different heights. How do we explain that? Or how do we as councillors interpret that?
Through you, Mayor.
Mr. Davis.
We'd have to take the plans that we've got before us to decide, and they would be the plans that would be the plans to be endorsed or not. So the plans that were supplied Friday, I can't speak to the different heights, other than they were for illustrative purposes. The ones that are before you are the ones that are attached to this application.
Right, okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Loram.
Can I just say one final thing? Very
I think
brief.
We've had all the questions.
We're
I think
not
we've had a good
assessing
go.
some shed down the end of Toulon Road.
Okay, we understand.
Right?
You've made your point well, Mr. Lahora. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thanks for
you,
your presentation. Okay, next presenters, we have Mr and Mrs Chris and Kim Canady to present, please. The Canadies will be presenting on 35 Cox Street, planning application.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, councillors. Thanks for the time. So I've prepared something, so I'll read it out. I'm not very good on the ad libs, so we'll just prepare to read from this. So I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to address the meeting today. The question for me is, how could council officers not implement the relevant design objectives in assessing this planning permit application? Why have the design objectives that contain quantitative measurements been pushed aside by qualitative persuasive language? The non-conformance to the design objectives will result in a building of a house that will not fit into the surrounding neighbourhood and will adversely impact on the livability of our property. Council's vision, or their statement, is to have a safe, vibrant, livable and prosperous community. Well, the livable part's up for question today, I think. This development is not in line with that vision. There is currently nothing like this house in the area in terms of scale, size and positioning on the block. Contrary to the Council's officer's statements that this new dwelling will, this new dwelling will not integrate well and is inconsistent with the pattern of development of the surrounding neighbourhood. My observation of recent developments along Cox Street, west of Sackville Street, are that they are all single dwellings and do not impose themselves on the streetscape and neighbourhood. Who allows a house of this size and scale to be built 1.4 metres from a fence line when the blocks have a north-south orientation? This is why design objectives exist, to ensure minimum setbacks and other quantitative measures, example building mass, are in place, so new developments do not destroy the amenity of neighbouring inhabitants. Council officers have rationalised the breaches of design objectives under the guise that the house fits into the character of the area and will not be detrimental to the residential amenity of the area. More has been written on the bluestone front fence, the cottage garden and the building facade with its weatherboards and gabled roof than has been written on the remainder of the proposed development. The building behind the facade seems to have been ignored and waved through by the planning department. And what do we end up with? A development that breaches 7 of the 9 design objectives relative to Port Fairy. Council reports and reports prepared for the applicant acknowledge these breaches, but they are set aside as it is assessed that this development will not be detrimental on the residential amenity of the area. And as was shown during the site visit, this is fundamentally incorrect. I don't have a CAD diagram, but I go to the old poles and string approach. I'm pretty practical on that perspective, and the poles that I erected on our boundary clearly show the scale of the proposed development and the direct consequential impact on our amenity at 33 Cox Street. Our home will no longer have the benefit of direct solar and direct sunlight from the west. Now, I noted in the architect's comments that accompanied the planning application that were lodged with council that, and I quote, "The proposed dwelling has been designed to create a north-facing courtyard which provides solar access to the living areas. This design is essential to the amenity of the inhabitants by creating a light and energy-efficient home to live in." Well, we currently have one of those light and energy-efficient homes ourselves at 33 Cox Street. And what about our amenity? Where have the council officers considered our amenity? Our home will no longer be light and energy efficient. Now, how is this right? How can a council officer assert that this proposed dwelling will not be detrimental to the residential amenity of the area when it clearly is? And as Chris said, there is inconsistencies around the boundary section disclosed in the architect report. Our roof of our height is 3.2, ceiling height is 3.4. That creates doubt around the accuracy of those shadow plans. Now, the council report also contains some irregularities. The second storey is not to the rear of the building, it starts in the centre. And additionally, there is no mention of the first floor step up from the 4 to 6 metre, which is highly visible from Cox Street and directly impacts on our amenity. Contrary to the planning department's assertion, the scale and size of this building and the second storey will be seen from Cox Street. The poles erected on our site clearly show this. In fact, it will be seen from the corner of James and Cox Streets from the steps of the Presbyterian Church and from the corner of Cox and Sackville Streets. This second story will not just look into our backyard, but into our neighbours' backyards and their neighbours' backyards. And I take it the point about if you stand in front of the property, you won't see the second story. Well, if I put my hand in front of my face, I can't see this room. So if you stand close enough to something, you won't see what's behind it. You step a foot either side, you'll definitely see this building. I said in an early email that this will have an impact. I said in an earlier email that the adverse impact this development will have on our livability is difficult to accept. I should have said it will be impossible to accept. We have proven this development does not align to the vision of the Moines Shire. This development will not fit into the character of the area and will be detrimental to the residential amenity of our house. A planning permit should not be issued for this planning application. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks very much, Mr. Kennedy, for your presentation. We'll now go to questions from councillors.
Yeah,
Councillor Gleeson.
Am I able to, do I do it together?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
30 seconds?
Yep, okay, we'll give you 30 seconds. 5 minutes was allocated for together, but if you'd like to add 30 seconds, I'm happy to do that.
I could do it for 30 seconds.
Yep.
After the Mayor, councillors, staff. In reality, 35 Cox Street is a 4 or 5 bedroom house, and it is a double-storey house. Put different words on it, comes out as 3 bedrooms, 2, 3 living rooms. Refer you to page 36, the Ordinary Council Meeting Agenda, where it states the proposal generally accords with the PPF and relevant decision guidelines. It doesn't meet the guidelines. The breaches affect our amenity, and by saying generally accords, is that reasonable to be judged as a very large development in the middle of Port Fairy that will be visible?
Okay, thanks, Mr. Kennedy. Yes, Councillor Gleeson with a question.
Thank you for your presentation. How long have you owned the home?
About 4 years now. 4 years, Councillor, yes.
4 years?
Yes.
Okay. In all the correspondence that I've read from you guys, you've indicated that you'd be happy to discuss your concerns with the applicant. So, in that, how did that process go? How were your concerns received by the applicant?
So we made moves through council and also with the applicant directly about meeting and going through the plans and having questions on the plan answered. But the phrase was that the applicant wishes to have their plans assessed as is, and we weren't prepared to compromise or negotiate at that point in time.
So there's been no dealings with the applicant at all?
No, we've tried, but we've had a stonewall at that point.
Okay, you have further questions?
That's what I'd like to keep going.
Yep, another question, yep. Go for it.
In the council document before us today, it talks about consultation. During the application process, extensive consultation was undertaken by council officers in order to understand and try to resolve the matters of concern and to attempt to limit the scope of objection to matters relevant to the assessment criteria. So my question is, have they been addressed? Have your concerns been addressed by council?
I'm not too sure who council officers were consulting with, but it wasn't with us. So no, to answer your question. We've asked, but they haven't been answered.
Do we have other questions from the floor, council? Okay, Councillor Gleeson has another one.
No, Councillor Gleeson's pretty
okay.
comfortable.
All good. Thanks very much,
No,
Mr.
thank you,
Kennedy, for your
Councillors.
presentation. Okay, move on to Mr. Colin Barry to present to council on Councillor Ducas's notice of motion regarding monitoring of wind and turbine noise at Ryan's Corner, which is agenda item 11 at today's meeting. So, Mr. Barry, if you'd like to come and take a seat at the table, please. Welcome, Mr. Barry.
This is very new for me. I've never been a troublemaker before in my life. And I've voted for about 90% of you councillors, and I think I'm a pretty good judge of character. So please don't disappoint me. I know you people inherited all these problems about the wind farms in the area, so it's not really a blame game as such. But it's a game now where you can right a lot of wrongs that have been done by previous councils from, I believe, 2008. And I think it's only fair and just that you do listen to a lot of people in the area, because I'm only just an average bloke, but this is going to affect me immensely. I chose to come down here to Port Fairy for my retirement. I'm 71 years of age. I worked hard all my life to get what I've got, and I wanted a little bit of land and somewhere to retire. And my passion is to watch sunrises and sunsets, and where I am, absolutely magnificent. I had 24 pages of this ready to go, but I've condensed it down to about 4, so bear with me, I'm all over the place. I was 2 years into my retirement here and very, very happy, living the dream. Then I got a letter in the mailbox. Come to a meeting. There's a meeting about a wind farm at Ryan's Corner. I had no idea whatsoever there was a wind farm being built. When I bought my property from a very, very reputable company in Port Fairy, nothing was ever mentioned about a wind farm being built. Otherwise, I would never, ever come down here. And it's God's country down here. It had a sign up on the outskirts of Port Fairy, the most livable community in the world in 2012. That's out the window now. It's gone. So I've left my glasses at home too, so please bear with me. So I went to the meeting, and what I found out was amazing, you know, at what these wind farm people are doing, how they're extending the height of these wind farms, and everything they're doing is just going on and on and on. They're getting virtually a free run at everything. And I went away from that meeting and I did a lot of homework on wind farms, and I could discuss these for days and days and days now. I'm fairly well up to speed with them. And I know the effects they have on us. They're an eyesore to begin with, and I'm only 2 kilometres away from these things. And I know the health ramifications, and I know that my property is being devalued. Everything I've worked for my life is going to go out the window by a devaluation of property. And we know that can be up to 50% of everything you've earned. And I'm not in the game to lose money to some corporate cowboys that want to come along and just generate money. I can still remember, I went to a lot of meetings. I went to one in Hawkesdale, and this lady got up and she was very, very passionate, and I took a lot from her. And she said about the wind farms, how she'd been complaining for a long time about the sonic sounds and the vibrations and everything going through her home. Anyway, some of the wind farm people came down and they did their tests with their New Zealand standards, which, whatever they are, they should be Australian standards. This is Australia, not New Zealand. And they came to the conclusion over there that yeah, everything was above the New Zealand standards. And their solution was to her, I think you better sell up and move on. And that came from the lady's mouth. And I thought, well, isn't this a great way to explain to an old lady she's got to move on? They can't do anything to help. Bearing in mind, I'm only 2 kilometres away again now. And I put it to you, the only thing green that's coming out of these wind farms is money. And money is generating everything from these wind farms. They only work at a third efficiency. If I had a business and all my workers were working at a third efficiency, I'd sack them, get rid of them straight away. And what these wind farms have been doing recently, all their contracts should be just sort of torn up, especially with the making of the wind farms and the turbines, where they were supposed to be made down in Portland. Now they're going to China, of all people, and we know how much you can put into.
Yeah, Mr. B, you're at the 5-minute mark, so if you give 30 seconds.
5 minutes.
To sum
all right.
up.
Right. I'm basically here to support Councillor Ducas's presentation on independent noise testing, and I believe that this is a must. And some of the money that is directed to the council in the way of windfall must come back to the residents, and you must have some sort of accountability. And I do believe there is a duty of care to us as residents.
All right, thanks, Mr. Barry, for your
Thank you.
presentation. We'll go to questions now, if there are any from councillors. Going, Councillor Gleeson.
Colin, thank you. Authentic, genuine, genuine concerns about your health and property. I'll write it all down. Have you undertaken any testing on your own behalf?
No. I'm about to do that.
Okay, thank you. Good, thank you.
Councillor Purcell.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Barry. Good presentation. Did I understand you bought your property 2 years ago without any knowledge? Was it 2 years ago? 4 years ago? 5 years ago, and moved down here 2 years ago. Yep. So you didn't? Nobody mentioned that this wind farm was going to go ahead.
No, I'm a pretty private person. I keep to myself. I'm a single man, and I keep to myself. I hardly even know the neighbours, no, I had no idea that there was going to be a wind farm. And I bought the place from a reputable company in Port Fairy, and I had all the legal paperwork done down here. Nothing was mentioned about a wind farm. Nothing at all. I had no knowledge. Nothing.
Okay.
Councillor Purcell.
Thank you, Mayor. As I understand it, you said to Councillor Gleeson you were going to do some testing, noise testing, under your own expense and steam. What do you expect would come out of the motion in addition to what you will do yourself?
Well, probably peace of mind for myself, but I know that if there is independent testing and it's away from the wind company people, I know it's going to be correct. Yep. So I'm looking now at council to make a decision on this, and then I can make a decision on how far I'm going to go with my testing.
Just one final one. My understanding that there's, of the 20 odd people that are affected by this, there's probably half of those going to do their independent testing. So I'm just sort of struggling to see what another independent test would do in addition to the independent test that those 10 people are going to do.
Well, surely it should be available to everyone. Yeah. That the noise that are making the what's coming out of the wind farm should be available to everyone, rather than just the people who want to choose to get an independent test done. If I can save myself a lot of money by not having to fork it out myself, I will go with the independent testing with the council. That's if you're prepared to go along with it.
Thank you.
I'm not a millionaire.
Thanks, Mr. Barry. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Barry, for your presentation. I can hear your concern and understand them fully. I'm just wondering, have you approached the Labor Party ministers that represent this wedge to express your concern? Because, if anybody's got the ear of the government, would you'd think be Minister Tierney and Pulford. Have you made any attempt to contact them at all over your concerns?
No, as I say, this is just from the what's going on. If I knew there was some sort of way to get to them, I would. But we've been down this path again with meetings where there's going to be representatives from wind farms and representatives come along, and they're there, but they can't answer the questions. We'll get back to you on that. I've been waiting 3 years now for someone to come and have a look at my property to see whether they can do anything about the noise. 3 years. How long do you have to wait?
Other questions for Mr. Barry? All right. Thanks very much for your presentation. Okay, next we have Mr. Neil Blaine to present to Council regarding the Mortlake South Wind Farm. Welcome, Mr. Blaine. You're right to go.
Good afternoon, Councillor. Your attention the matter of Mortlake South Wind Farm signs on public roads. Just in front of the councillors, I've given the councillors a 4-page document, which you all have. I'll just quickly walk you through what's in that document, because I'll refer to it in my presentation. On the first page, on the top, there's the red box, which is actually an extract from the public advertisements about the construction updates that Mortlake South Wind Farm provide. On the front page, there's a copy of one of the signs I'm referring to. And the last 2 pages are correspondence from Moines Shire that was provided to the Mortlake South Wind Farm Community Engagement Committee. And on the last page, I've highlighted the answers to 2 questions, which I'll refer to as well. So that's just a general outline of what I've given you. Just as some background, there's approximately 6 of these large signs on the public roads at the boundaries of the project. And what they give the impression is that the Mortlake South Wind Farm project extends onto the public road reserve and actually are part of the restricted area that make up the wind farm construction site. So these signs state that a 40 km/h speed limit applies past those points, and that unauthorised entry to the work site is not permitted, and visitors must report to the site office and other things. My question that I've been pursuing through the CEC is that why aren't these signs actually located on wind farm property at the individual site entrances throughout the project? And I also believe that Councillor Dukas has raised the issue with councillors and Moines Shire staff previously. If you refer to the construction update from the local paper that states in the red box, it's titled Important Safety Message, and it says Mortlake South Wind Farm is an active construction site. Please observe all safety signage including speed limits and exclusion zones. Speeding or entering a work zone poses a danger to you and to others. So Mortlake South Wind Farm is actively advertising those speed limit reductions on those public roads through the site. I'll put written questions on notice regarding this issue in the December 2020, January and February 2021 Mortlake South Community Engagement Committee meetings, and finally, after 3 months, I finally received a response from Moines Shire, and they're the last 2 pages on the attachments that I gave to you. It said, Moines Shire has stated that Acciona have been advised by council to relocate signs to the fence line within private property, and also the rules set out in the signs on the road reserve do not apply to public roads. In last week's Mortlake South Wind Farm CEC meeting, Acciona representatives seemed to claim that the signs should remain on public roads for general safety concerns. The issue's dragged on for months, and given that Moines Shire staff have now acknowledged in the Mortlake South Wind Farm Community Engagement Committee meeting that these signs should be relocated to private property, the Community Engagement Committee voted to ask the councillors to write to Acciona requesting immediate removal, relocation of all these large signs that currently are on public roads. I believe that this will come before council at the next council workshop. I would ask that councillors support the Mortlake South Community Engagement Committee request and ask that Acciona immediately remove these signs and relocate them onto private property, and that for transparency, the outcome of council workshop discussions on the matter should be provided to the next Mortlake South Wind Farm CEC. Can I also be provided with a copy of the letter Moines has sent to Acciona requesting removal of the signs referred to in the last CEC? And I assume that's the letter. And I'll just point out for clarity that the Moines Shire response is that it says Acciona have been advised, and I don't know whether that's in writing or verbally, so I am assuming that a letter exists. Also, just in closing, I'd also just like to put forward my support for Councillor Dukas' motion in the meeting today, asking for Council to support the request from the Ryan Corner community for Moines Shire to undertake independent noise testing for that project, as it has already done for Hawkesdale Wind Farm. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Blaine, for your presentation. Questions from councillors? Councillor Purcell.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Blaine. the summary of that, and looking at the first page of this, you're asking that that sign be put on the fence line. It looks like it's a metre off or something. So you're asking for that sign to actually be put on the fence line?
Well, I've been advised by moines Shire staff that they should be removed from the public road reserve and placed into private land, and I'm supporting that advice.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And I presume that's the fence line on that photo?
Yeah. And all the signs, the 6 or so that exist on the edges of the project, are all in the same location on public roads.
All right, thank you, Mr. Blaine. Councillor Foster?
Thanks, Mr. Blaine. Just wondering, are they close to entrances? Pardon my ignorance here, but are they close to, because there's a lot of information, presumably you'd have to stop and get up close to read these. They're not something you'd look at even if you were driving 40 kilometres an hour. So I'm assuming that they are close to the entrances to the construction sites.
No.
They're not.
So the one that I've given you is actually located on Grinters Lane. So immediately as you turn off Mortlake Road, turn into Grinters Lane, this sign is basically there.
Okay, thank you.
So you're not even anywhere near the actual entrances.
Okay.
Other questions for Mr. Blaine? Councillor Dugas?
Yeah, thanks, Neil. Now, this is an ongoing saga. Do you think, or what will come first, the signs being removed or the completion of the wind farm?
I'm worried that the completion of the wind farm will come before the removal of the signs.
So am I.
Other questions for Mr. Blaine? Okay, thanks very much for your presentation. Okay, last we have a letter from Ms. Jacinda Coffey, who couldn't be here today. So after discussion with councillors, Mr. Millard will read that out on behalf of Ms. Coffey. But we also discussed in future if members of the public wishing to address council can't make it themselves, we encourage them to send a representative on their behalf to present face to face. Mr. Millard.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Dear councillors, I'm writing on behalf of the Ryan Corner community to urge you to support Jim Dukas's motion that the Moines Shire conduct noise testing by an independent acoustician at Ryan Corner Wind Farm. On behalf of the community, I would like to thank councillors Gleeson, Foster, Lockett and Dukas for giving up their time to attend our recent meeting at the Orford Hall. It's fair to say we were learning as we go and have the advantage of information widely shared from other wind farm projects in the Shire and the state. The general consensus from all wind farm projects is that the immediate communities count for little and are just collateral damage in the grand scheme of things. Past and present Moines Shire councils have literally thrown their constituents under the bus, so to speak, by supporting and facilitating these massive energy projects with scant regard or thought for those in close proximity and most affected. The Ryan's Corner facility will pour millions of dollars into council coffers over its lifetime. Surely it's not an overreach to ask for support in what is reality the only defence our community has against these mighty conglomerates. Acousticians Marshall Day, whom I'm sure you're all familiar with now, have associations with most wind farms in Australia. The question that must be asked is why proponents consistently use the same acousticians. Is it because they know the system inside out? The same company currently in the Supreme Court over the Mount Emerald wind farm and have previously been entangled in non-compliance issues, again regarding Ball Hills. Is there a pattern? Would you trust someone who has complete control over their own testing on their own projects to gain compliance? What's also alarming is that the new proposed system of regulation by the EPA will deny national justice to minority groups living in close proximity to these enormous industrial facilities. It's obvious the state government are removing every possible obstacle so that energy facility proponents have a magic carpet ride through to the finish, whether they are compliant or not. Are councillors aware that the proposed Willerton wind farm are seeking to install turbines 250 metres tall? Just get your head around that for a moment. Do you honestly deem this appropriate for a populated rural community? We do not live in the back of Burke. Ryan Corner is a mere hop skip from Port Fairy. These are populated rural communities consisting of working farms and many occupied family homes. It's absolutely beyond the pale, and it would not even be considered by any level, that it would be considered by any level of government. As our local representatives, can you help our most affected constituents in a small way, which will offer a form of insurance in the event noise issues once construction is completed? There is no doubt there will be issues. We have hindsight and experience to tell us that. We do not wish to be a thorn in the side of council. We are reasonable ratepayers who want a fair playing field. Let's be absolutely clear, we're not against renewable energy. However, we do not support projects being constructed in populated locations. The Moines Shire may now have reduced capacity in permitting these projects, but you do have the responsibility to ensure your constituents who will be most impacted on a daily basis because of the sheer enormity of these projects are treated fairly and justly. It's ironic that all these major projects gain support because they are touted to provide local jobs. How ironic, I only read a few days ago in the Warrnambool Standard that turbines for Hawkesdale project and most likely Ryan Corner will not be in fact manufactured by Keppel Prince in Portland, most likely constructed of cheap Chinese steel manufactured offshore and imported. What a slap in the face and surely a significant embarrassment for all involved. It was interesting to note that Councillor Mead and Mr Millard were guests in Canberra last week and was discussing energy projects with government ministers. I wonder if it was mentioned during these discussions that these energy efficient facilities actually negatively affect many of your constituents, some who are forced to leave their homes and virtually not the bat of eyelid from any responsible authority. Is it all just about money? What's more important to Moines Shire, big offshore companies with big money or the resident rate-paying families, many who have resided here for decades? Yours sincerely, Jacinta Coffey on behalf of the Ryan's Corner community.
Thanks, Mr Millard. That concludes our public participation section of the meeting.
Mr Mayor, can we ask questions in relation to the letter? It's the same as public participation.
Answer.
Councillor Dukas, obviously you're going to ask him of the author of the question.
Not my letter.
I have a question in relation to what was stated in the letter to someone else other than the author.
Councillor Lockett.
I've also got one through you, Mayor, if possible.
Well, we'll take them on notice and pass them on, if you like.
No, mine's not to the author. It's in relation to the letter to someone else.
Go ahead. Ask the question.
Okay. It was mentioned in the letter that Keppel Prince were upset they didn't get the job of producing the towers and they're made in China. My question is to Councillor Purcell, does he still have a refinery in China?
I'm happy to answer that.
You don't have to answer that.
I'm happy to answer that.
Okay.
No, I
He doesn't have
don't.
to answer it.
No, he doesn't. There you go. It's answered.
What did you say?
No, I don't.
You don't? Oh, well, that clears that up, Mr Councillor Purcell.
Thank you,
Councillor
Councillor
Lockett.
Dukas.
Thank you, Mayor. My question was regarding about the meeting in Canberra. I believe you did have some successful meetings. Is that appropriate and okay to ask about that now?
Yes. Ms Coffey alluded to the fact that Mr Millard and I went to Canberra last week to meet with ministers and advisors of ministers, and I can say that at every meeting, wind farms and the impacts they're having on our community was mentioned.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay, that concludes the public participation. We have a motion here that the order of business be changed and items 5, 11, 12 and 13 be brought forward. Seek a mover for that motion. Councillor Purcell's moved, seconded by Councillor Lockett. All in favour? Motion carried 7-0. So we'll now move to item 5, which is planning permit 35 Cox Street, Port Fairy. Building and works to construct a dwelling to be presented by the Director of Economic Development and Planning, Mr Brett Davis.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll take you to the summary of key issues in the report. I'll address some of the issues raised as well outside of that. But essentially the issues for consideration in the assessment of this application are whether the proposed dwelling is appropriate, having regard to the planning policy framework, whether it meets the garden area requirements of the general residential zone and the relevant provisions of the heritage overlay, Schedule 55 and Schedule 10 of the design and development overlay, and the performance standards in Port Fairy Design Guidelines Area 4A, whether the concerns raised in the objection warrant refusal of the application, whether the proposal will have amenity impacts to adjoining properties, and whether this is in keeping with the character of the area, and whether the proposal will produce acceptable outcomes and enable the orderly planning of the area. Clearly, from the report, the planning recommendation is that it does, in fact, meet the requirements and is put forward that a notice of decision to grant a permit be recommended. Council's Heritage Advisor has confirmed that the proposed dwelling, including its footprint, site coverage and materials and finishes, are acceptable for the heritage overlay context. Council's independent heritage advisor. The design and development overlay schedule, you've had a number of discussions and points put to you with regards to that. The conclusion of the planning assessment is that it is acceptable. Yes, there are variances to the guidelines, but they are guidelines. In fact, somebody else raised earlier that it's not black and white, it is subjective. And the planner's view in this case has been that it is subjective and warrants a recommendation for approval. The big issue, and if I turn you to attachment 5, page 8 of 8, which is the conclusion of Mr. Lorum's response or objection, where it states council may allow some flexibility in the application of the design and development performance standards where the breach is minor or isolated can be justified. And Mr. Lorum argues that there are 6 breaches of the performance standards that don't stack up in their view. We say 1, they're not breaches, and 2, that they are variances to the design. They are not musts, they are objectives. The application does not demonstrate how the proposal will comply with Res Code standards A12 and of A15. We've said and raised this before, and I think Mr. Myers raised it. The standards A12 and A15 don't apply to this assessment, as there is no permit trigger for a single dwelling of a lot over 300 square metres. Nevertheless, while they aren't considered as a part of this planning process, from a building perspective, it has been reviewed and it is deemed acceptable. With regards to some of the other points raised, the first one about the VCAT link that Mr. Lorum raised straight away, that was put into the planning report. A simple click to that VCAT link takes you to the section that says what we can't consider. And straight under that it says we can only consider issues that are related to the reason for which the planning permit is required. Therefore, overlooking and overshadowing are not the considerations. That's what's meant by that paragraph. But the link is live and valid. It was also raised that Res Code has come up a number of times. I just need to reiterate that it isn't a Res Code assessment, although a Res Code assessment was provided above and beyond what was needed to be done, and in fact it does comply with those requirements. With regards to the consultation discussion, there has been a lot of back and forth with council officers and Mr. Lorum, mainly getting to the objection and to focus on the merits of the planning application. Yes, there was less contact with Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy as they engaged Chris to be their consultant. So I do stand by the officers there. There was a great deal of consultation that has gone on during this process, as it was with the other neighbour that subsequently withdrew their application, their objection. I am advised that the applicant was clear that they didn't want to make changes to the plans, and that they wanted the plans to be assessed as they were, and here we are for that assessment to take place. So with that in mind, I put forward the recommendation to council that the application be supported, subject to the conditions that are contained in the notice of decision.
Thanks, Mr Davis. Do we have any questions firstly before seeking mover? Councillor Lockett with a question.
Thank you, Mayor Mead. It's just a bit of a clarification again regarding the res code assessment. Did go over it, and I appreciate it, Mr Davis, but just for myself and for the gallery, just that seems to be a real tricky kind of fine point of they weren't required to provide one, but they did anyway. And could you explain so that they even meet that criteria? Is that correct?
That's correct, Councillor Lockett. So, whilst not obliged to do that, in response to the objections that were received, they then did an assessment to show that that would be the case. Ultimately, from this point on, should a permit be issued, there is still a building permit that will be required, and a building surveyor would be looking at those issues related to overlooking and overshadowing, and it is considered that those standards would be met.
Thank you.
Yes,
One more.
Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mayor. The other question is regarding single versus double storey in Cox Street. There's not many, but there's no overlay or restrictions on having two-storey in Cox Street. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor, that is correct. The guidelines are not prohibitive of double storey. It is subjective to argue, is this a single or a double storey? The assessment says that it presents as single from the front, but it has two-storey element to the rear. So that's the way the assessment's gone. Does that mean it's two-storey in a layman's terms? Possibly. The guidelines don't rule that out.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr Davis? Yes, Councillor Gleeson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Mr Davis, just for clarification, I'm trying to get my head around this planning policy framework. So what's it for? What is it for?
Through you, Mayor, the planning policy framework is in which what all planning applications are assessed.
Okay, so is it just a guideline, or is it this is what we make our decisions based on?
Through you, Mayor, it is a series of policies and or guidelines and or shoulds and musts.
Okay. Follow-up question, Councillor Gleeson. Councillor Smith.
Yes, through you, Mayor. Mr Davis, the heritage overlay, who did the assessment? Was that, sorry, it was probably stated earlier, but was it through the council or an outside person did the heritage overlay?
Through you, Mayor, it is from Council's independently appointed heritage advisor that does all those assessments. So that is a heritage architect who reviews our applications within heritage areas. And yes.
Any other questions? Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mayor. Could I just clarify with you, please, Mr Davis? What I'm hearing is that overshadowing and overlooking are not valid considerations for a planning permit of this nature. Is that correct?
Through you, Mayor, in this case that is correct.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Purcell.
Thank you, Mayor. It'd be normal, I presume, for the heritage advisors to actually go on the site and have a look at the buildings and the situation. Under COVID, was it possible for the heritage advisors to do that, or did they just look at the maps and plans that we've seen?
Through you, Mayor, I'd have to take that one on notice. I assume the heritage advisor that we've had has been our heritage advisor for many years. So even in the absence of being able to visit the site, through our GIS and street photos and Google Maps, they would have been able to make that assessment. I can't confirm whether they were on site because of the COVID situation.
Any other questions? Okay, I'll seek a mover, please. Councillor Lockett has moved, seconded by Councillor Purcell. Councillor Lockett.
Mr Mayor, is Councillor Lockett moving the officer recommendation or the alternate?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Dugas. Should clarify, Councillor Lockett.
The officer's recommendation for approval.
Recommendation for approval.
And that's what I was seconding.
Thanks, Councillor Purcell. Yep, you can speak to the motion, please. Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mayor. it's a tricky one, and I've thought long and hard about it, and I've heard the various discussions, and I've learnt a lot during this process. I'm like, what? Hang on, and really been trying to flesh things out. But I think I can empathise with the neighbours that their amenity will be impacted. It's a vacant site, and any building will impact the amenity. If it was a single-storey flat property similar to theirs, it would still have, and then set back a fair few metres on either side. It's still going to change what they've already had for a few years now. So I think there has been some compromises of it being set back. I think it was 17 or 19 metres from the front. I'm one who's, I would say, conservative of protecting the heritage aspect of Port Fairy and the integrity of the streetscape, absolutely. But I think the photos that demonstrate what it looks like from the street, I don't think it will significantly impact. I think it will add that historic kind of aspect to Port Fairy and that important central part of town. So I'm happy to support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Lockett. Councillor Purcell.
Thank you, Mayor. I also found this a difficult one. I think probably most of the councillors did, and we were lucky enough to have a good site inspection last Tuesday, where we went through both with the objectors and also the applicant. Overall, a great deal of the issues. We actually stood in Mr. and Mrs. Kennedy's kitchen and got a really good impression of what the impact was going to be. And it will be significant, I've got no doubt in my mind, and I'm certainly sympathetic for them both. But purely from a planning consideration, I think as councillors, after considering the report, looking at the objectives of the report, that from my point of view, I believe that whichever way we go, and if this goes to VCAT, I believe that the application will be successful. So therefore, I will be supporting the motion as is.
Thanks, Councillor Purcell. Other councillors speaking to the motion? Councillor Gleeson.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to foreshadow an alternative motion.
Yep. You speak against this motion.
To speak against this motion, yes.
Yep. And the motion is?
That we refuse to grant a permit.
Okay. That motion is foreshadowed. You can now speak against the current motion.
In the Shire, we have a planning policy framework. So I would have assumed that gives us guidance to make our decisions. In the report presented to Council from our officer, and if you want to have a bit of not a chuckle, but I've made some significant points and notes. Look, seriously, she's identified 7 breaches, just as Stephen did and just as Chris did, but said that they were acceptable for this development because in her summary she states the proposal will not have any detrimental impact on the residential amenity. Now, I'm still trying to work out what amenity is, but I grew up in Port Fairy, and when we talk about heritage, every little part of the town has a story to tell. In Bank Street, Brooks's Hardware can't be rendered because the bricks tell a story. There's a half a dozen shops in the town that have tiles on them, and they can't be removed because the tiles tell a story. So Heritage's report in this area means that the little brick houses with the flat roofs, they don't tell a story. They continue up to James Street where the Leachmans built a house with a flat roof, so it doesn't tell a story. Around there's about 6 or 7 brick houses that obviously don't tell a story. Well, they should tell a story. We've questioned the height, and the applicants have already told us that the 2-storey part of this house is over 4 metres higher than the neighbour's house. And we're seriously sitting here not being expected to consider that. I don't wear it. The bulk and the mass ensure new development does not compromise the characteristic scale and pattern of the area. Bloody hell. If that doesn't change the area, what does? You can look at your, and I can't really pronounce it, axonometric view, and it shows you the massive construction between two smaller constructions with no setbacks, etc. The setbacks don't need maximum standard, don't meet the minimum standard. That's what our report says. They don't meet the minimum standard, and yet it's okay on this occasion. The garage width is over 6.5 listed in the schedule. It's over. It's 7 point something rather. But that's okay because it's only a suggestion. The site coverage exceeds that listed in the schedule. The proposal will not overwhelm the pattern of the buildings or the characteristics of the area. Please. In my old terms, we said, does this pass the pub test? Imagine owning the house next door for 4 years and enjoying your family holidays and your barbecues in the sunlight, and then being told that as long as you have sunlight for 5 hours between 9 in the morning and 3 in the afternoon, then all is good. I just don't get that, how we wouldn't consider that, the impact on the neighbour. On Saturday night, I actually went to the property at 7:55 and I watched the setting sun shining on the eaves at 32 Cox Street. We have an obligation to try and, it is our responsibility to provide acceptable solutions, to consider and assess the impact of the proposed development on the amenity. We can address this by not granting this permit. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Gleeson. Other councillors speaking to the motion? Councillor Dukas?
Clarification, please, to Mr Davis. On page 28, under decision guidelines, it talks about clause 43.025. But I can't find it 43025 in the report. Were we meant to look it up, or what were we meant to do with it?
So, through you, Mayor, that's the application requirements. No, that's not reiterated in the report, but that's taken out of the planning scheme. It's part of the standard blurb that goes under decision guidelines.
Right, so that blurb isn't in here, so we don't know what it is.
No, through you, Mayor, it says in addition to the matters listed at clause 4302 application requirements, Council has to also consider the Port Fairy design guidelines.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Dukas like to speak to the motion?
No, I don't, Mr Mayor.
Okay, other councillors? Okay, back to Councillor Lockett as the mover.
Thank you, Mayor Mead. I thank councillors for their comments and the thorough presentations that we've had from all parties. We've heard it's grey, we've heard breaches of variations, we've had a council heritage advisor who's independent of council say that it meets the criteria, that the overlooking, this is a hard one to swallow, that the overlooking and the overshadowing aren't relevant. Res code assessment's been provided, wasn't required but was provided. Councillor Gleeson spoke about the stories that properties tell, and this is a vacant lot, and let's hear the news story which will be told, hopefully, if this is approved. Thank you.
Okay, thanks Councillor Lockett. Councillors, time to vote on item 5. All those in favour? Councillors Foster, Smith, Mead, Purcell and Lockett. Those against? Councillor Gleeson and Councillor Dukas. The motion is carried as per the officer's recommendation. Okay, moving on to item 11. Which is Councillor Dukas notice of motion independent noise testing at Ryan Corner Wind Farm. Councillor Dukas, if you'd like to read out the motion there, please.
Do you want me to read it out? Or?
Yes, please, yes.
Okay. The notice of motion that the Moines Shire conduct independent noise testing by an independent acoustician at Ryan Corner Wind Farm as per New Zealand standards, and make all the raw noise data and raw wind speed data available to the public upon request.
Thanks, Councillor Dukas. Before seeking a seconder for Councillor Dukas' motion, do we have any questions? Okay. We have a seconder for Councillor Dukas' motion. Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mayor. Happy to second for debate.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Dukas to speak to your motion.
Well, I was going to say Mr CEO, Mr Mayor, I think we've discussed wind farms, Ryan's Corner, Hawkesdale, Mount Fines, all of them. It's a straightforward motion. It's asked for independent testing. Now, questions were asked earlier about people doing their own testing. That is independent testing per household or individual testing. It's not what the Shire would do. The Shire would do its own independent testing with 6, 8, 10 loggers around the wind farm, whereas I know that some councillors were thinking, well, if the community's doing it, why should we do it? We need to do our own independent testing with a number of loggers that would satisfy, I suppose, scrutiny to be done according to the New Zealand standards, whether we agree with those standards or not. And that would give the Shire a document that they could rely on in the future if either one of the adjoining landowners or anyone else for that matter decides to challenge the Shire in relation to being affected by noise.
Okay, thanks Councillor Dukas. Councillor Lockett as the seconder.
I'll reserve my right. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Okay, thanks Councillor Lockett. Other councillors wishing to speak to the motion?
Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Gleeson would like to speak to the motion?
Oh, sorry, no. I just want to, I had a quick question, but sorry.
No, okay. Other councillors speaking to the motion? All right, I'll speak to the motion. I'll be, as similar to the previous discussion, points were the same as the Hawkesdale motion. I don't believe this is a direct role for council to be involved in noise background monitoring. We certainly support the community in many ways in advocating to the company and the state whose role this falls into, and we'll continue to do that on their behalf. That's my position on this motion. Any other councillors wishing to speak to the motion? Yes, Councillor Purcell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Is it all right to ask Councillor Dugas a question? Or is, I presume...
Well, ideally we do that before we
I'll
move into
do
the debate.
that when we do the next one then.
Okay.
Look, I think what I've got to say, I basically said last time, and I don't want to repeat it, so I won't be supporting the motion because I don't believe it's a role of this council, and I seriously don't know what we do with it when we get it, and I don't think this is would be the end of it, and I'm not sure whether each month we're going to have a new wind farm going to come in front of us that we are going to look at obtaining data for. So for those basic reasons, I can't support this with the limited information we have at the moment in regard to it.
Thanks, Councillor Purcell. Any other councillors? All right. Well, Councillor Lockett reserved.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to vote against the motion because in the previous discussions we've had this is not about not supporting Ryan Corner. We've got noise testing underway for Hawkesdale Wind Farm, and that process we need to find out what we're going to do with that data, what we're going to do with that information, how we can best advocate and support for the community. They're both on hold, so to speak, for a while, so we need to assess how we can best support our ratepayers by spending our money in a strategic way rather than ad hoc each meeting bringing things to council. We need to strategise our advocacy to our state and federal governments. There's very specific ways we can do that rather than fumbling our way through it each meeting with various things coming to us with no information, no supporting information at all. So I'll be speaking against the motion. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Lockett. Councillor Dukas to summarise. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, to me it's straightforward. We either support our community or we don't. By doing independent testing at Ryan's Corner, now I heard it say that it's on hold. Irrelevant if it's on hold. How are we to know whether those wind farms are compliant or not? We are the responsible authority. if the community comes to us, whether it's one person or 6, and says we have noise issues, what are we going to do? Can anyone tell me? Mr. CEO, what's our next move if someone comes and says, I can't sleep at night because it's too loud?
Councillor Dugas, we've gone over this. This is
Well,
your chance to
it's a
summarise.
legitimate question. Well, I'm summarising the fact that we can't do anything because to date we haven't done anything. As a responsible authority, we have done nothing to protect the community, whether it's noise, brolgas, eagles, peregrine falcons, nothing at all. Even our traffic management plans leave something to be desired. What I'm proposing here is that we do our own testing, get the results, have them analysed, and then if there are any issues, we've got our own independent results in front of us sitting on the council table. Without that document in front of us, we've got nothing to go by. And we've left the door open for the wind farm companies to proceed down the path of telling us fibs. And then the community having to spend who knows how much, tens of thousands of dollars after the event to do all the noise testing, not only audible noise testing, but infrasound and the rest. Why? Because the council hasn't done its due diligence and done what it's been voted in to do, and that's to protect the community. So if you support this motion, you're doing the right thing by the community. If you don't support it, you're just throwing them to the wind. And I'll be very disappointed if this motion fails.
Thanks, Councillor Dugas. Okay, councillors, time to vote on item 11. All those in favour? Councillor Dugas. All those against? Councillor Foster, Councillor Smith, Councillor Gleeson, Councillor Mead, Councillor Purcell and Councillor Lockett. That motion is lost. Moving on to item 12. Councillor Dugas knows the motion. Council to independently verify noise reports of wind farm projects in Moines Shire.
Do you want this one read out as well?
Yes, please, Councillor Dugas.
Thank you. The council write to all wind farm companies with projects in Moines Shire whose projects have undertaken noise testing and request they provide raw noise and raw wind speed data to council to enable it to independently verify those noise reports. Quite straightforward, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We'll seek a seconder for that motion.
I'll second it for discussion.
Councillor Purcell has seconded it. So, Councillor Dugas to speak to the motion.
Yes, look, self-explanatory, Mr. Mayor. We need that data. I'm not confident in getting it, but if we get that raw data, we can make our own assessment, not having to rely on companies that are somewhat suspect, to say the least.
Councillor Purcell seconded.
I'll reserve my right.
Okay. Other councillors speaking to the motion? Councillor Lockett?
Thank you, Mayor. I was going to ask a question of Mr Davis, but he's not here.
No, he's
Oh,
conflict of interest for items 11, 12 and 13.
Oh, Michelle's there. Sorry. Can I ask a question of Mrs Granger, if possible?
Ms Granger, happy to... Yep, that's fine. Take a question.
Regarding the seeking of the raw data, we already haven't had great answers to that. Are we able to get that data?
I think we're going to we'll have difficulties getting the raw data from the met masts or the anemometers that wind farms put up, that they use to scope how much wind and is it feasible for wind, because that seems to be commercial in confidence data.
Okay.
So
you're speaking...
Just the furthering
Another
on.
question, Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Matt. So is that their intellectual property and we can't kind of request it? Is that?
Yes, that's what we've been advised by the one company we've asked for it from to date.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Councillor Gleeson,
Just a point of clarification. Why does this need to be a motion? Why can't we, as in a workshop, agree that we want to do that?
Well, Councillor Gleeson, if I can answer that,
Yeah.
it's before us now as a motion.
Oh.
It's our job to deal with it as a motion now, for or against. So would you like to speak to the motion? No? Any other councillors? Councillor...
Mine was a question to Ms Granger, if I could.
A question for Ms Granger.
the issue, the difference between requesting and then providing is a different thing altogether. Because there's no, we can't demand it, I think is correct, but there's no reason why we can't ask for it.
That's
Is that
correct. That's correct, councillor Purcell.
Thank you.
Okay, any other councillors speak to the motion? All right, back to councillor Purcell, who reserved.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I've seconded this motion for debate, and look, realistically, I don't have a problem with the motion at all. We're going to ask them whether they'll provide the data. If the companies come forward and provide the data, great. It'll save us a heap of money and a heap of grandstanding if they'll do it. And I don't believe they will, but if they do, great. So from my point of view, I'll be supporting this motion.
Thanks, councillor Purcell. Councillor Dugas to summarise, thanks.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. As some councillors alluded, whether we get this raw data or not leaves a lot to be desired, but I'm asking for it and I'm doing it through the council process so it's open and transparent. The raw data gives the opportunity for council and I suppose anybody else, if they could get their hands on the raw data, to find out exactly what's going on in relation to the noise. We've seen some of these companies challenged, some have been challenged and have, I suppose, capitulated on the court steps. Others have made payments before it's got to court. One should ask the question, if they've got nothing to hide, why hasn't any challenge gone to court and been fought out, in the courtroom? And you don't have to be Einstein to work that out. So I'm asking or requesting in this case that they provide the raw data. If they do so, then they're confident that their raw data is proven to be true and correct and that they're inside the New Zealand guidelines in relation to noise and they have nothing to worry about. If they don't provide it, what are they hiding? Because the raw data can be accessed if the council goes and does its own independent testing, just as individuals can. So it's pretty open and easy to understand why this motion is here. It's simply to get the raw data so we know exactly what's going on.
Okay, thanks councillor Dugas for your summary. We'll now put item 12 to the vote. Councillors, all those in favour? In favour is councillor Foster, Smith, Gleeson, Purcell, Lockett and Dugas. Those against, councillor Mead. Motion's carried 6-1. Moving on to item 13. Councillor Dugas notice of motion. Council release final report of raw wind speed and raw noise data testing.
Okay, thank you. The council released to the public, upon request, all the raw wind speed and raw noise data from council's independent noise testing at Hawkesdale when it receives the final report on this testing.
Okay, a seconder for the motion. Councillor Lockett seconded. Councillor Dugas to speak in support of the motion.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Another very simple, straightforward recommendation is to provide the raw data upon request to the community. So if anyone out there wants to go and get their own assessment done, they can do so. The reason I've got it here is because, one, open and transparency, and the fact that if it's in this motion and it's carried, then for whatever reason, if the CEO of the day decides to make it confidential, then this motion will stop that happening. Now, I've got to clarify that I'm not saying the CEO would do that, but just in case, who knows, we could be under commissioners by then and stop them doing it.
Okay, thanks councillor Dugas. Councillor Lockett as a seconder.
Reserve my right, thank you.
Okay, other councillors speaking to the motion? Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Look, I'd like to support this motion, but I thought in our, December or February motion regarding the Hawkesdale that this was part of the recommendation. Is there a clarification?
Yeah, look, we discussed that earlier. I think it is part of it, but nevertheless, it's here for us to deal with now.
Yeah, well, the motion's before us, and look, I'm willing to support it because I think we're paying for the testing. I think we own the intellectual property of it, and I think it's only fair that we are transparent to our community that this is available to the public for their perusal.
Thank you,
Councillor
Councillor Smith.
Now the councillors speaking to the motion, Councillor Purcell.
Thank you, thank you, Mayor. I'm a little bit confused about this. So we're moving another motion for something we're already going to do. Is that the situation we've got? So next month we'll move another motion to do something we're already going to do. So I should put up a motion to say that the council have to pick up my bins next week.
They do.
I know they do, but this is already in the motion we've already got. I just don't know where this ends.
I get it.
Do we just keep putting up motions to say we're going to do something we already said we're going to do? I give up on this. This is madness.
Thanks, Councillor Purcell. Councillor Gleeson to speak to the motion.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to endorse what Councillor Purcell's just stated. We've already agreed to do this. At our December meeting, we said we're going to do, or whatever meeting it was that we...
December.
We agreed that we're going to support the Hawkesdale community by doing independent wind testing and making the results available. So I don't see why we're even discussing this, because we've already decided to do it.
Mr Mayor, if I may, that December meeting wasn't explicit that the raw data be made available to the public. It just said, I think as Mr Davis said earlier, make it available. I mean, make it available when? 10 years' time?
Okay, so Councillor Dukas, it doesn't matter because
In part?
the motion has been moved and seconded, so it's here to be dealt with now. So we're dealing with it, the motion in front of us, regardless of the previous motions. So any other councillor wishing to speak to this current motion? Yep, okay. I'll speak to this motion and support this motion. It's something that we've committed to already, and if we're going to pay for the test in Hawkesdale, there's no reason why it shouldn't be released. And in comparison to the previous two motions, which commit us to unknown dollars, this one will be we've already paid for, so happy to release it. So I'll speak in support of this motion. No other councillors, so we'll go back to Councillor... Sorry, did you reserve? Sorry. Yeah, Councillor Lockett as a reserver.
Thank you, Mayor Mead. Yeah, we've been around the traps a little bit with this one, but maybe it makes it super clear that we are okay to release the data, so happy to support. Thank you.
Councillor Dukas.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There, I'll use Councillor Lockett's words, super clear. I know what Councillor Gleeson said earlier, that we've already voted on it, but this definitely makes it clear that it will be released. Once it's become available, it will be released. Not in 6 months' time, not in part, not after it's been changed in any way or form, but the documents will be released. So, you know, Councillor Gleeson, quite clear on that, thank you, and I wish I have your support.
Okay, thanks. Okay, thanks, Councillor Dukas. Time to vote on item 13, councillors. All those in favour?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Thanks, thank you.
Buy your pot.
All carried 7-0. Motion carried.
Can we go back to the first one, have another crack?
Okay, do we need another motion to go back to one? No. We just go back to item number 1.
Item number 1 is next.
Yep. Monthly financial performance report presented by the Director for Community and Corporate Services, Mr Kevin Ledden, who is just moving his way up to the presentation table. Mr Ledden.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, this finance report sets out actual results for the 7 months to the end of January of our financial year compared to budget. Our operating budget, despite COVID, is still looking in pretty good shape. Some unders and overs, some probably just reporting back on our caravan parks, which has probably been the most uncertain item in our revenues, and it looks like we will probably exceed our reduced COVID budget. So the bookings throughout post-COVID lockdown have been really strong. So as we lead into March long weekend and also Easter, so I think that's a positive. The visitations are back very, very strongly in our caravan park. So, but operating budget is looking on track overall at this point in time. Our capital works budget with carry forwards and variations, we're targeting 28.6 million, as we said, which is probably the highest amount ever for our capital works program at the moment. 7 months in, we've spent $12.5 million. That's compared to $8.9 million at the same time last year. So the delivery is good. Trevor and his team are working hard on finishing that off. There's still, I think, $4 to $5 million in our roads program that will be spent, which is currently unspent. So there will be some carry forwards, but I think we'll reduce them compared to previous years. So I think we're on for probably a record spend. On a positive note, the only variation in this month's finance report is for the second component of the local roads and community infrastructure funding. So that's a total of $2.257 million, and they will be works that we would not otherwise do. So if you look at the variations in the footpaths, the walkway, the bridge works at Hopkins, car park at East Beach, etc. So that's a really positive outcome and a good story for our residents out of that 2.2 million. All our financial indicators remain strong in our balance sheet, but obviously spending the capital works program will draw down that cash position towards the end of the year. So the recommendation is that the finance report be received and approve those variations. Mayor, happy to take questions.
Thanks, Mr. Ledden. Do we have any questions firstly? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Mr. Ledden, the finance report income statement on page 11, the first item, rates and charges, and there's an addendum 1, shortfall driven by commissioning delays related to the Dundonald wind farm. I'm just wondering, is there any update on that, when we will be expecting money from Dundonald? It seems to be generating electricity, and are we going to get any money?
Thanks, Councillor Smith. I think Mr. Miller's happy to take that one.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I will. Thanks, Mayor, if that's all right, Mr. Ledden. I think, councillors, as you know, we've been having some ongoing discussions with Tilt Renewables. I'm expecting a pretty positive outcome to that, which I'll be able to announce fairly shortly. Mr. Ledden and myself have had a couple of meetings so far and follow-up discussions. They do acknowledge that they have been generating power since just prior to Christmas, so my expectations are around that timing.
Thanks, Mr. Miller. Other questions for Mr. Ledden? Councillor Purcell.
Thank you, Mayor. Early on in the report and the snapshot of financial position under the indicators, if we look at the budget, the updated budget or the budget for 2021, we've got cash and investments of 9.8 million, and we've also had we have included in there a borrowings of $3 million. Could you just explain to us why we wouldn't use that $3 million, the 9.8 million, rather than borrowing the 3 million?
Yep. Through you, Mayor. That's a very good question, Councillor Purcell, and has come up in prior years as well. So probably to explain to our ratepayers that currently there's $18.7 million of cash sitting in our balance sheet. So when we spend down our capital works program for the balance of this year, that will reduce significantly. So we've got a gross spend of around $14 million. But some of there'll be associated grants with some of those, so the actual net spend will be multi-millions. That would get us down to a normal level of cash. That level of cash is there to fund liabilities and reserves as well. And in particular, we had a question earlier about the waste reserve, which is cash back. So when the tip is rehabilitated, also leave accruals for our staff run to the order of about $5 million. So when we analyse the cash backing of liabilities or reserves in our balance sheet, that will account for the cash, Councillor Purcell. That's not to say that we do borrow the $3 million, because it is working out having sufficient cash for cash flow purposes and working capital. And as we know, our big leaks of cash come around rates. So we traditionally have our lowest cash levels through July, August, until we get to the first instalment of the new year, for instance. So it's a bit of a balance between the committed cash for reserves and other commitments, running down the capital works, and then looking at the overall working capital cash requirements.
Okay, other questions for Mr. Ledden? Or Mr. Greenberger as part of the Capital Works? All right, we'll seek a mover then, please.
Sorry, the second one? And then I'll
Councillor
move it.
Purcell.
It was just in regard to the expense report, the expenses, the conversion of the Port Ferry Community Service Centre meeting room to the kinder space. I just wouldn't mind an update on where we are with that.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, Councillor Purcell. So we have a small internal working group working with the architect. The architect advised as of yesterday that the detailed technical plans to go out to tender are almost complete. A couple of sub-engineer responses required, so not too far off going to market, and then obviously that will lead towards the build. So we're progressing well.
Thank you, and happy to move the...
Okay, Councillor Purcell has moved the item 1 financial report, seconded by Councillor Foster. Councillor Purcell to speak to the motion.
Look, I'd like to just congratulate the officers and the council on the strong position we're in and the strength of that report. It's a pleasure to be involved in this council. We're one of the few that, look, and we were at a Great South Coast meeting last Friday, and our position is, I can tell you, a lot stronger than many others in the region.
Thanks, Councillor Purcell. Councillor Foster?
Nothing further to add. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Other councillors wishing to speak to the motion? All right. Yes, Councillor Dukas?
Can I ask a question now on operating variations and capital variations, etc.?
Well,
or do we get to ask that in a minute?
Well, that's we sort of had the questions, but you'll give you
Oh, you were just talking about the finances, not about the operations.
Yeah.
However,
you're right to go with the question. Go for
yes, simple. Under the heading on page 17 of 40, it's got task groups. What's a task group? I thought that was us.
Directed at Mr. Ladden.
I don't know who's.
Can you share that with me, Councillor?
Yes, I can.
What is it? Under Port Ferry swimming pool. Oh. No, to take that one on notice.
$1,600 worth of.
Yeah.
Someone's getting a free ride.
Okay, that's taken on notice.
Thank you for that, Mr.
No,
Mayor.
okay.
Obviously, none of us knew, so.
Yep. Well,
I'll get back to us.
Good question. So, all right, back to Councillor Purcell as the mover.
No need, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, councillors voting on item 1. All those in favour? Motion's carried 7-0. Item 2, review of council allowances, presented by Mr. Ledden.
Thank you, Mayor. So under the old Local Government Act, if you like, we're in transition to the new 2020 Act from the 1989 Act, but the provisions in relation to council allowances still apply from the old Act. It'll be the last year of that, and then this review process for council and mayoral allowances will move to an independent tribunal. So as part of that requirement, you have a recommendation to have the allowances remain at their current levels as a Category 2 council and give public notice of that review. As I said, this will be the final year that we go through this process with council. It will become an independent review under the new provisions that kick in from the new 2020 Local Government Act. So happy to take questions.
Okay, questions firstly? Councillor Purcell?
Under the independent review, what sort of considerations will be taking place in setting the allowance?
Through you, Mayor, I don't know that, Councillor Purcell, so we might we can make some inquiries under what sort of process and benchmarking, I guess, that they might look at.
Other questions? Okay, a mover, please.
No one wants to move this
Councillor Purcell has moved, seconded by Councillor Smith. Councillor Purcell?
Yes, look, the allowance for councillors is not a pay. It's an allowance to cover expenses that councillors incur during their term. And I've heard it said before that, you know, for the rate per hour is extremely low, and it certainly is. There's a lot involved in council, a lot of hours involved, and And I think the allowance that's paid just goes some way to covering the costs that councillors actually, the time and cost that councillors put into it. The rate, you could pick a rate out of anywhere, and we're at the top end of the level we're at, and I think it's a good move to have the independent umpire look at the rates. I don't think it's ever good for anyone to set their own rate of remuneration, and so I certainly support that, but in the meantime I'm more than happy to move this motion.
Thank you. Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Look, this is a requirement under the Local Government Act, and it requires that councils must review and determine the level of mayoral and council allowances in a period of 6 months. So we're well within that, and we're in the range 2 of category of council, which sets the requirement. So I'm more than happy to support the motion.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Any other councillor speak to the motion? Councillor Purcell?
No.
Okay, councillors voting on item 2. All those in favour? Motion's carried 7-0. Item 3, appointment of acting CEO, presented by Mr. Miller.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. It's probably a report I'm pretty happy with. It's actually flagging that I've got a bit of leave planned, and under the new Local Government Act requirements, we're obliged to bring a report to council to make the decision on an acting CEO if periods longer than 28 days. So the report identifies that Mr. Davis would fill that role during my leave, and I'm very pleased that the full executive management team support the appointment of Mr. Davis, and I believe he'll do a great job.
All right, any questions firstly? Okay, mover please. Councillor Foster's moved, second by Councillor Dukas. Councillor Foster?
I'm just happy to support this. I think it's high time that our CEO had a small break. He works very hard, so and I know that we as a council have full confidence in Mr. Davis and the executive team, so I'm very happy to support this motion.
Thanks, Councillor Foster. Councillor Dukas?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's nice that our CEO is having a bit of a break and gives me time to have a bit of fun with the acting CEO.
Thanks, Councillor Dukas. Any other councillors? Councillor Lockett?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I think it's great to see that the CEO is demonstrating to all of us, councillors and staff, the importance of taking leave. No one on their deathbed says they wish they had worked more, so I hope your golf swing gets good and you relaxed and come back all nice and fresh. Not that you're not now. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Gleeson?
Just like to make a comment that Mr. Davis has been here over 12 months, and I think it's a fantastic recognition that you have the confidence in him to take on the position. Not that that's a reflection of anyone else in the room, but good on you, Brett, and well done.
Anything? No other councillors wish to speak to the motion? Okay, Councillor Foster? No.
Nothing further to add, no.
All right, councillors voting on item 3. All those in favour? Motion's carried 7-0. Item 4, Croydon Rail Trail Precinct Barbecue. Mr. Ledden.
Thank you, Mayor. Councillors, this is, apart from anything else, it's a great community project. So the project itself, Lions Club, has been around the block a little bit. If you read the history of this report, it was going to be solar at one point in time. So Council had previously made the in-principle decision to accept responsibility for it. We didn't quite get over the line with what type of barbecue it was going to be. So it's resurfaced. It will really complement that developing area in Koroit around the station there. It's probably quite timely because only recently Council agreed to take over that parcel of land, principally for insurance purposes, which has the playground and the exercise equipment. This is adjoining it, so the barbecue. And Southwest Community Foundation have come on board since the last round, and they will be supporting it financially as well. So that's given it a bit more of a deadline because of their timelines as well, councillors. So a great project. So the timely bit is that we can now do the survey and extend the line, if you like, and add the barbecue area to the playground and the exercise equipment. That hadn't been done. Will become community management. That takes care of the insurance, but also the recommendation is that we also take over the ongoing maintenance of the barbecue. So Happy to take questions, Mayor, but the recommendation is that we agree to ongoing ownership of the barbecue and extend that parcel of land accordingly.
Thanks, Mr. Land. Any questions? Okay, mover, please. Councillor Dukas has moved, seconded by Councillor Gleeson. Councillor Dukas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, as outlined by Mr. Ledden, it's got a little bit of a history about it. It's a pity we didn't get the solar one up and going, but that was a different time and a different council. However, this council has decided to run with this, and I'm sure that it'll get full support from this council. And it's a great achievement, and I should congratulate the Karoit Rail Trail and the Lions Club, because they work well together. A great asset for Karoit. That area, I must admit, is looking a picture. You'd be surprised how many people comment on how good it looks. And it's in Karoit, not Port Fairy.
Thanks, Councillor Dugas. Councillor Gleeson as a seconder.
Just like to endorse Councillor Dukes' comments. Anything that's community involved, the Lions Club, etc., great effort, and happy to support it.
Any other councillors speaking to the motion? Okay, Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mayor Mead. Yeah, as Councillor Gleeson and Councillor Duke has highlighted, great community project, and the Lions Club have really pushed this all along, so congratulations to them. Yeah, happy to support.
Councillor Foster.
Yeah, just to add to those comments, I'd just like to acknowledge the Southwest Community Foundation as well, which has made this a major project for Karoit. It'll be terrific for the community, and I look forward to having a council barbecue there sometime soon.
Great, thanks. Any other councillors? All good. Councillor Dukas as the mover.
No need, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, councillors, all those in favour of item 4? Motion's carried 7-0. Moving on to item 6. Footpath petition for Princess Highway, Port Fairy, between the Catalina Caravan Park and Thistle Place. Mr. Greenberger.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So this report relates to a petition received by council in January of this year. It's signed by 44 signatories. The petition is requesting the council consider construction of a new footpath from the intersection of Thistle Place and the Princess Highway down to the Catalina Caravan Park. Council's governance rules require the petition to lay on the table for a month before it can be considered. We'll bring back a future report to council probably next month. Happy to take questions, Mayor.
Councillors, for Mr. Green, councillors, any questions for Mr. Greenberger? Okay, a mover for this one, thanks. Councillor Dukas has moved, second by Councillor Smith. Councillor Dukas, any comments?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be quick to say that it's a much-needed footpath. I mean, in times gone by, when Time and Tide were up and going, there would be a lot of people walking along there. And now that there's more young couples and children growing up in Port Fairy, it's much easier to push a pram or whatever they use with kids in it on a footpath, and kids on skateboards, etc., have more fun on concrete than they do falling over on gravel tracks.
Thanks, Councillor Dugas. As you know, this is we're not voting for or against, it's just receiving at the moment.
Yeah, I know that, but I'm thinking ahead, Mr.
Okay.
Mayor, thinking ahead.
Councillor Smith, seconder.
Yeah, nothing further to add, Mr. Mayor, just that it's a request by 44 citizens for the council to look at it, and I'm sure it will be looked at in our next budget session.
Any other councillors? Councillor Lockett.
Thank you. I just agree with Councillor Dukas. His comments that it would be, it'd be a good one to flesh out at budget, but it would provide a vital link from the west into town. So, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Lockett. Councillor Dukas.
No need, Mr. Mayor.
Councillors, all those in favour of item 6? Motion's carried 7-0. Item 7, Ocean Drive, Port Fairy footpath. For Councillor Foster has declared a conflict of interest at the beginning of the meeting.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I just have declared a conflict on the basis of the fact that a family member owns property in that area and has made a submission, so I'd like to leave the room.
Thanks, Councillor Foster. Mr. Greenberger to present, please.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. So this report is a carryover from an issue from last year's budget process. There was a petition received in relation to a footpath at Ocean Drive in Port Fairy. We explored the possibility of an off-road footpath, which this report explains has been abandoned for various reasons that came from that submission process. We intend to workshop potential options with councillors during April in the lead up to the budget decisions. But what we're talking about tonight is simply that council consider the Ocean Drive footpath as part of the 2021 budget process. Should that bid be successful, we would then go through a consultation process with the community in relation to whichever option the council decides on in the budget process. Happy to take questions, Mayor.
Any questions firstly? Mover, please. Councillor Lockett has moved. Seconded by Councillor Gleeson. Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mayor Mead. Yeah, happy to see this one come around again, and it'd be really good to flesh out, well, at budget time, but also the consultation, because there's very strong kind of opinions about where it should go, but the residents that live there would know best because they'd see it. There definitely is a need for a footpath along there, particularly the end of Powling Street. There's a real kind of dangerous corner. You've got a lot of people funneling into Pea Soup Beach, so really good one to flesh out. There's problems with it being on the beach side because of inundation and things like that, which occur a few times a year. So I think the other side of the road would be my 2 bobs worth, and I'll have that discussion later. Thank you, Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Lockett. Councillor Gleeson as the seconder.
Yes, since this has been going on since 19, Mr Mayor, it's important that we make it happen. A lot of young families up there, and certainly a lot of concern, particularly on route to schools. You know, kids on bikes, safety, it's become a massive issue, so I'd like to see it go ahead.
Any other councillors speaking to the motion? Councillor Lockett.
No further need, thank you, Mayor.
Okay, councillors, all those in favour of item 7? Motion's carried 6-0. We'll ask Councillor Foster back into the room.
Should listen to the door.
Up to item 8, Port Fairy Yacht Club lease petition to be presented by the Director for Infrastructure and Environment, Mr Greenberger.
Yeah, thanks again, Mayor. This report is very similar to Report 6. It's in relation to a petition received in January of this year, signed by 467 signatories. The petition follows a November Ordinary Council meeting, and the petition seeking that Council instruct its officers to proceed with statutory procedures for negotiating new Crown tenure with the Port Fairy Yacht Club. Again, in alignment with the Council's governance rules, this petition has to lay on the table for a month, and it will be considered as part of the submission process for the Yacht Club, which is currently underway.
Okay, thank you, Mr Greenberger. Any questions firstly? All right, a mover, please. Councillor Lockett's moved and seconded by Councillor Foster. Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a procedural matter to receive and table the petition, and look forward to throwing it in the mix with a fair few other things so we can sail on smoothly. Thank you, Mayor.
Councillor Foster.
Nicely done. I've nothing really further to add, except I think this issue has generated a lot of interest, so I look forward to discussing it down the track.
Any other councillors wishing to speak to this motion? Councillor Lockett. Councillor Lockett as the mover, thanks.
No further need, thank you, Mayor.
Okay, councillors, voting on item 8. All those in favour? Motion's carried 7-0. Item 9, Audit and Risk Management Committee minutes. So to be presented by Community and Corporate Services Director, Mr Kevin Ledden.
Thank you, Mayor. So these are the minutes of Council's Audit and Risk Management Committee from September. So we're always a bit behind in terms of adopting these because they go back to the Audit Committee to be adopted at the next meeting and then come to Council. But you do get the agendas of all the meetings now. So as I understand it, that keeps you abreast of the more current activities. So there was a December meeting, by the way. But it's a usual range of audit, risk, compliance matters that run through that committee, which are all referred to in the minutes, and we now have councillors Mead and Dukas as the current reps on that committee, Mayor. But recommendation is to note those minutes.
Thanks, Mr Ledden. Any questions from councillors on those minutes? All right, so you can move it, please. Councillor Purcell's moved, seconded by Councillor Gleeson. Councillor Purcell.
Thank you, Mayor. Interesting reading the minutes of the meeting, and I think it is good that we do certainly get copies of this particular committee, because this is probably the most important committee that council has. And if you have a good audit and risk committee and working well, it actually takes a lot of the responsibility, not necessarily the responsibility, but it takes a lot of the work that councillors need to do. And as I said, it's an extremely important committee who undertakes a very important role within council. So more than happy to move this motion.
Thanks, Councillor Purcell. Councillor Gleeson as a seconder.
Yes, Mr Mayor, just as a new councillor, I recognise the importance of the committee and hopefully it does its job well.
Thanks, Councillor Gleeson. Any other councillors wishing to speak to the motion? Councillor Purcell?
No need.
Well, councillors voting on item 9, all those in favour? Motion's carried, 7-0. Item 10, Mayor and Councillors' reports. From that list there, do we have any questions from anyone to the relevant attendee? Councillor Smith.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. On 4th of February, we met with the Port Fairy SES. I'm wondering, was there any update on new premises or whether they may be moving?
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Yes, I attended a meeting there with Council Officer Darren Dumsney to discuss the efforts to move out to the site. There's going to be co-joined with CFA. They asked for our assistance in advocacy, which we were happy to oblige with in advocating to the State Minister who's relevant to that funding.
Thank you.
Any other questions from councillors?
Mr Mayor, can I just answer
Councillor
that?
Dugas?
The SES, because I have grave concerns that the local, not local government, that the state government aren't real supportive of the SES. I've had it said to me that they're trying to find a quiet backdoor way of getting rid of the SES and moving it into the fire department. As you know now, it's called Fire and Rescue. They show up at anything. Even if Mrs Brown down the road had a heart attack and they call an ambulance, sometimes you find the fire truck there. And my concern is that the SES might be done away with and incorporated into the fire department, which would be a sad blow for rural Victoria, because when there's an issue out here in the country, it's usually the little fire brigade down the road and the SES that are there first. So I think that the biggest push we can make, we should, in getting the funding available for that SES service.
Thanks, Councillor Dugas. I agree with those comments, and we'll be making those presentations to the Minister for Emergency Services. Any other questions from councillors? All right, moving on. Item 14, general matters. Any general matters from councillors? Councillor Gleeson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm aware that the Croydon Music Festival, Croydon Irish Festival, had a meeting with a couple of the officers, and I was just wondering where that's going, in the sense that they're still seeking funding, and the festival's about a month away, so I was just wondering what's happening there.
Okay. Councillor Davis, happy to take that?
Do I need to go over there?
That must be the hot seat.
Thanks, Mr Davis.
Through you, Mayor, all is proceeding as planned, my understanding is, Councillor Gleeson, so discussions with the operators and our events team are progressing, including the assistance with regards to the funds.
So there's funds available?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Just, obviously conversation, a little bit of concern expressed from the committee. And I asked, have you provided what you need to provide? Oh, well, we're still uncertain of our COVID plan because of restrictions or whatever. So, I'm just trying to follow that up. And
so through you, Mayor, that's exactly the situation. We're still awaiting to see what they finally need to do before we can allocate the associated funds to make that happen. And we're assisting with them on the COVID assistance requirements as well that they've been working through. As to whether or not the event is proceeding, that's clearly their call to make, but we're trying to assist them in every step of the way to get it over the line.
Other matters for general discussion? Councillor Lockett.
Thank you, Mayor. It's been a difficult week to not see the army that normally set up the folk festival, which brings $10 million to the region. So it's literally been heartbreaking. I went and had a kick at the soccer ball on the oval there last night on my own, like a weirdo with the sprinklers on that Wally had put on. But the tents would normally be set up and ready to go. So to see that not happening, but to also see the council and the community to go, well, the folkie is part of our psyche and it's part of the region and will proceed in some way, shape or form. So most of the venues in town, I think, have got bands on. There's council have done well to get roaming buskers. The shanties at the wharf are on. There's various events on, so it's still kind of on. But also for next year, they've nearly sold out of the first round of tickets for 2022. They've already done an announcement, so the folkie is a huge part of obviously Port Fairy's kind of storytelling and the culture and the arts precedent of the town, but for the region. So it's kind of on this weekend, and it always will be. But next year, bigger and better. So look out for the tickets and things, and come and support the festival in some way, shape, or form. Also, the Lake School's on. There's plenty of events on in the region. I think Hawkesdale Pub's got some shindigs on, some bands. There's lots on. So get around and support small business, support the festival, support the towns and the communities that make up this great Shire. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Lockett. Other councillors with general matters? Councillor Dugas.
Go on.
Just one more.
Councillor Gleeson.
Monday the 15th is the inaugural CEC meetings for Hawkesdale and Ryan Corner, and I just had a request that they could be in person. Some of the committee members are not too confident or sure of the Zoom meeting, so we might just have to try and make those in person, Leslie, if we can.
Yep, well, Councillor, Mr Davis is happy to take that on board with his role in
his first day in the job.
Okay. Councillor Dugas.
Thank you. Now, I've got a couple of issues in regard to wind farms. Do you want me to do that here or in the CEO report?
CEO's report?
CEO's report, just regarding submissions, that's all.
Where they normally go.
In general matters, first one on water in Koroit, doing the mains up the main street. They would have to be the most arrogant, pig-headed company or government authority I've ever come across. And if you talk to the residents and the shop owners, they've even got a better description than that. I mean, their attitude is appalling. And I hope someone gets to hear this, because they need to pull their finger out and show some respect to the local community. Vic Roads I'll blame a little bit, because it's their road and they should have used a little bit more enforcement to make them handle the traffic a lot better than they did. So one on water, Andrew Jeffers, if he's still there, you know, get out of the office and go and see what's going on, because some of the reports I've had from some of the shop owners about the attitude of some of their senior managers is just, well, I won't say it here because we'll maybe keep that for a private conversation. Vic Roads are also doing roadworks in Koroit, from Bega down to Mickey Burke's, and from what I've seen and heard, they're doing a terrific job. Hasn't quite finished yet, but I believe that when it's all done and dusted, it'll be a great outcome, something that we've been waiting for a long time and finally got. So a good tick to Vic Roads, what are they called now? Regional Roads Victoria or something, anyway. The locals still call them Vic Roads, so a little tick there. The other one was to do with, Councillor Gleeson was talking about the wind farms. Hawkesdale is the 15th. Now, I've asked to contact someone in the Shire about a young lady by the name of Leanna Blake has put an application in to join the Hawkesdale committee. So can someone make sure that that's on the council, on the agenda for that to go ahead?
I have a feeling that that has been included, that she has been included in the 6.
So
She has already.
yeah. So we might clarify that at
Anyway,
next
just
week's
thought
workshop.
I'd bring it up to
Yep.
one of those two council reps
Okay.
to make sure that when the agenda comes out, if there's no Leanna Blake name, you can follow it up. That's all. Can you remember that?
Okay. Any other council general matters? Yes, Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Look, I've just got putting a positive forward. The feedback I've been getting in the north-east section of the Shire, which is basically up here, on the roadworks that have been done over the last 12 months, which is quite interesting to see that we've had some positive feedbacks, considering the last 3 years it's all been pretty negative. And the roads specifically to Darlington, Carramballick, the Dundonald Nerran, the Warndoo Darlington, and the Warndoo Chatsworth Road, just near the intersection there. Yeah, so it's good that people often make a positive comment, whereas in the past, so I'd just like to pass on that there are some good stories coming back, but there's still a lot more work to be done. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Smith.
I've got a couple more.
Councillor Dukas.
Thank you. As we spoke about earlier with Croydon and the barbecue, I don't know if any councillors have been that part of Croydon for a while, but it is looking truly fantastic with the fence and the roadworks, the little pump, the skate park. A lot of people have commented on how well it's come up, so a job well done there. So that doesn't mean we drop our guard, forget to mow it or anything, but it is. It's a credit to the Shire, to everyone in the Shire, and the Croydon people really do appreciate it. And the other one was a late one to Mr. Greenberger about the Mortlake Framlingham Road. There's an awful bad patch that needed repairing months ago. I don't know if it's our road or Vic Roads, but something needs to be done.
Yeah, through you, Mayor, we are doing some major patchwork, so Mortlake Fram Road is council's responsibility. We're doing some major patches in the area at the moment. I know that particular section of road's been open for a couple of weeks, but the idea is that we'll do the preparation for all those major patches and then come through and seal them in one lot of work, which is a more efficient way of doing things. So we should see that patch sealed in probably next week or so.
Okay. Any final general matters before we move on?
Oh, it's probably CEO.
We'll move on. Item 15, urgent business. No urgent business. Item 16, CEO meeting schedule and activities report. Mr. Millard, would you like to comment on anything there?
I'm happy to take questions on the meetings, and then I might make a comment on the
Okay.
activities report, if that's all right.
All right, split them up. All right. Any questions on the meetings?
Get there first.
Yeah, okay. I'll go with the question. Mr. Millard, on the 8th of February, meeting with Colleen White, Regional Director, wondering on if there was any successful progress made there with regard to the Port Fairy landfill project.
Through you, Mayor. I think there was. I think the upshot of that was, DELT may make further assessments of what's actually in that particular landfill, but at the same time progressing our application so that we can complete the revetment work. So I think it was a pretty useful meeting. Mr. Gibson was there in place of Mr. Greenberger on that one. We'll follow it up as we will with the Federal Department as well.
Thanks, Mr. Millard. Any other questions from the meetings? Okay. Any questions for the CEO activities report?
Perhaps if I could just comment,
Yep.
Mayor, just a couple of things. Just on the report, apologies to Council for not including the normal wind farm report. We did do, as you know, we had our review of the wind farm or the renewable energy unit. We made a number of changes there. One of the suggestions out of that was that we improve our reporting into Council. That didn't mean that we wouldn't do any. It means that what we will do is hopefully more targeted and shaped to suit the Council. I guess in the meantime, so that mistake for not including that's in my court, so I'm happy to take questions if people have them generally anyway, and we'll follow those up. But you'll see a change in the reporting process from the next Council meeting. I would draw your attention also to the CEO's message around the, it's not post-pandemic boost for regions, it's actually boost for regions full stop. And, you know, I think the general consensus that the regions are what we've always known, they're great places to live and they have a lot of opportunities. So, you know, the city folk are certainly catching on to that in a big way. And I think one of the challenges for us is to, particularly around demand for land, supply and housing, that we do really good strategic work so that we can cater for this renewed interest in the regions. And we also need to push our barrow as far as improving housing diversity for Shire so that we can have people take up those vacant jobs that are available at the moment. And at the rear of the report, I would note there's there's 2 pages of words of appreciation, which I thought was pretty good, and most of those are around the good work that our officers do. So happy to take questions, Mayor.
Thanks. Mr Millard, Councillor Lockett with a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question regarding Portfree Skate Park. I know there's some extensive community consultation underway and there's community groups meeting about that, but we're also looking at a portable kind of facility in the meantime. Have we had any progress with being able to reopen a pseudo skate park or something in the meantime?
Mr Greenberger, might be able to take that.
I'm not of any help. Sorry, Mr Mayor, I've been on leave and I'm not sure where that's up to.
Happy to take it on
Sure,
notice,
Mayor,
that's fine, just follow
we will
up.
take that on notice.
Yeah.
I know there was some inquiry around a former portable that we had, but it wasn't up to being removed. So
it's about
it wasn't portable.
It wasn't portable.
It's
a former portable.
I think it's stuck in Kirkstall and don't even think of removing it, it'll fall to bits.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions for the CEO? Yes, Councillor Dugas.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We had a member of the community today talking about our EES statements and asking the Minister to do an EES from our fines, yet wasn't that long ago we sent a submission off to the government in relation to Brolgas where we've shortened the setback distance instead of lengthening it. So I find it strange that, you know, here we are, the community wants to help the Brolgas and we've turned around and made it more easier to kill them. So that's a strange one. And could that submission that we sent be put on our website, please? It's a public submission. I mean, it's called a public submission. The council has endorsed it, even though we had no real input. We got it on a Thursday, I think.
Mr Millard?
Yeah, true, Mayor. Absolutely can be put on the website. It was certainly endorsed by the council. Yep.
And just last week we had, well, we were asked to make comment on the noise submission that the government are proposing, a base case and a 1 and 2 option. Ms Granger sent us the submission. She called it the council submission, but we've had no input. There's 2 submissions. We've had no workshops, no input, no community input. I haven't seen the final draft that's been sent off. And, well, I don't think it should be called the council submission because council's had nothing to do with it. It just goes against our communications or our policy about conferring with the local public.
Yep, okay. Councillor Dugas. Mr Millard, happy to take the question.
Thanks, Mayor. Councillor Douglas, I've got some empathy for your position on the basis that the timeframes for response in submissions by government are often very short and don't really fit with our council meeting cycle. That being said, we did draft that submission like we normally would and circulate it to council. We had a couple of responses, certainly yours against and one for. And on the basis that Ms Granger was pretty clear that respond in either way if you had concerns or if you didn't have concerns. No response was taken as no concerns. So given the time frame, it had to be in Friday. So, but I would point out to you, and I will make that submission available on the website as well, but we did quite a bit of extra work around advertising that submission to be available for anyone to put in a submission. And there are a number of changes made to the one that was circulated based on the feedback. So I asked Ms Granger about that, whether council comments received from Ms Foster, Councillor Foster, and also Councillor Dukas. Did we change or amend? And there was some back and forth between Ms Granger and myself. So, you know, for council's information, to rank and provide feedback on each of the three options proposed, with option 1, direct regulation, is still council preference. Second in the list is a base case, but built in direct feedback from Councillor Dukas about real-time monitoring. Strengthen our submission regarding EPA as primary regulator, stating we wanted to ensure they were adequately resourced, and there was a need to have offices located in southwest Victoria, where most of the wind farms are. Raised that council would like to see a review built into the system to assess the continued use of the NZ standard, particularly where health reports are based on national health and medical research. Added a conclusion to summarise our key points, including that any system review needs to have community trust and confidence. And I think, you know, from our perspective, we already had a position of the council in support of the EPA taking on noise. We've been advocating and lobbying for it pretty well since I've been here, including in Richard Wynn's office. So I thought, in substance, our assessment on Friday was fair, and based on that feedback, I agreed to submit it. Thanks, Mayor.
Thanks, Mr Miller. Any other questions? Councillor Dugas got another question?
Why weren't we sent the final draft?
Mr Miller, happy to send that?
Definitely.
Yep.
I mean, it should have been sent out. I mean, it had to have been by Friday. We all know that time frames is correct too. We could have just wrote a letter to them and say, we need more time because of X, Y and Z. But having all that aside, we should have just got a copy of that submission as Ms Granger sent it off to the government. Could have pushed a button somewhere and shot it out to us.
So happy to circulate that. Councillor Purcell.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, I'm just trying to work some way of getting this question into a part of the report, but I just can't do it, so I'll just ask it anyway.
Transparency.
Yeah, and that's as honest as I can be.
That's great.
The Peterborough, some members of the Peterborough community requested that council write to the Corangamite Shire regarding the small tiny housing project. And I think we suggested that we would bring it up today. Look, and I'm happy if we put it off until the next meeting or what we do with that. But as I said,
Happy to take that feedback. And in response, we've obviously had those discussions related to us. You had a presentation from the Alliance Group from Peterborough last Tuesday. My understanding, Mr Davis can confirm, but we have a report. I think we have a report at EMT tomorrow. So we'll bring that into workshop as a follow-up, Councillor Purcell.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Dugas.
Follow up, there is a meeting in Peterborough on Saturday, I believe. Did everyone get that email?
No.
Did you get one from... You haven't?
There's one of tentative, couple of tentative dates.
Okay, so Councillor Dugas might circulate that.
I'll follow that up and make sure that Leslie gets the exact right information, and then she can shoot it out to each and everybody.
Any other questions
Officers
for
are
Mr
invited.
Millard as part of the relevant to the item 16 report? Okay, that being the case, declare the meeting closed at 4:48 p.m. Thank you.
Thanks, man.
Thanks to those at home watching.